Okay. Um, but yeah, to talk about this externalization process, we're talking about it like psychologically, how this externalization process results in there not being anything on the internal side of the being or of the subject, and so all they have is they have nothing to externalize from within themselves. They can only take what is in the external world or what's given to them and wear it as a mask to put over themselves externally. If we take this into Tolkien, this is actually how Sauron is defeated. Because what Sauron does is he has this unrelenting will to dominate all life and the entire material world. This is for the purpose of what he sees as perfecting it and bringing it all into control for this sort of perfect environment. He's not a force of like pure entropy where he wants to destroy everything. He wants to rule everything in the and design it and build it in his image in terms of like what he sees how everything should be in this perfect state. He's a very cunning entity, but he's a builder. He's a craftsman, right? And so he crafts the ring. So the way he understands to do this, at least towards the end and coming up in the second and third age, when he makes his rings of power, is he realizes that in order to this is a realization that he has, in order to externalize. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I thought I would go. um, in order to have a mastery over the external world, he realizes that he has to externalize his power. So what he does is he crafts a master ring called the One Ring. And Tolkien says very specifically that into this One Ring he pours his malice, his hatred, his contempt, and his willpower to dominate all life, right? So what he actually does is he puts a big part of his essence magically into this physical externalized object. Now, in this process, so what then happens is that he becomes tied to this ring. His being is tied to this ring. And so when he dons this ring and then he disperses these rings of power to the races, the various races, elves, men, and dwarves, those rings are connected to his one master ring, those externalized rings that goes on the fingers of essentially the primary leaders or rulers of those races, like the nine kings of men he gives them to. Um, that is an externalization of power, and through that, they're able to rule their individual kingdoms and sort of ensure that they're able to have their own personal control. It's just a small slice of the pie. Sauron has the master control. He's able to essentially read their minds and influence them because they're connected to his mind or spirit because they're connected to the ring, which is an externalization of his mind or spirit. Now, here's the thing. In his attempt to grasp the secret fire or the flame imperishable, right, which is the flux of time which allows for a sub-creator, which he technically is, to manipulate the world. He doesn't just want to manipulate the world in his small section in his life where he exists. He is a Maiar as to his being. So he's a step under the Valar, right, who created the world. So he's a Maiar. He's like a sub creator. But he wants to rule everything. So in this process, this involves the control of the external world. He's not content with controlling his direct area of which he's responsible for in terms of the entire created order. He wants to control all of it. So he has to externalize his power and disperse it. But here is the thing. In his grasping after that fire to attempt to encompass it in this ring, right, and bring them all and in the darkness bind them, it actually ends up being his downfall. Because once he externalizes his personality and his power into a physical object, it now grants it now allows for his greatest weakness because now it can be destroyed, which is the exact same thing I'm saying about like people in this time, what we just call, for lack of a better term, normies, right? Is that they externalize everything, their willpower, their belief, their desire to create, all of these passions, and not all of them are negative passions. The drive to be fulfilled, the drive to love, the drive to assist and help, the drive to be um, even wanted and included in other people's um, thankfulness or praise or whatever else. These drives that can be bad but aren't inherently in themselves like negative drives, they externalize all that into these physical material objects outside of themselves. But what this does is that now, though, they can be destroyed because just as Sauron's ring is able to be destroyed if you return it to the Mount Doom, the volcano essentially where he formed it in, where he was forged, if you return it and cast it into the fire, it's destroyed. Sauron then is destroyed, or at least to a great extent is destroyed, because he poured all of his essence into it, and now once that's incinerated, he goes too. And we're seeing essentially that same thing where the great temptation, especially since 2020 and coming into this time, is to not do the interior work that is needed to create the world in the vein in which you are in, to take the elements of creation and work within that vein. You know, we're not kings of countries. We don't have that kind of reach. We have, for all relative purposes, very small spheres of influences and small sections of talent in which we can affect those spheres of influence. And once we begin to grasp beyond our means too far to try to encompass these wide swaths, you know, this massive ambition, this requires excessive externalization into the world, where you just don't have the oomph to be the prettiest, the most talented, the strongest, the fastest. It's just not there for you. And you could push your limits in certain areas, but in order to get it, you need to then rely on an externalization of techne, or you need to adopt a mask of the external world, ideologically, technologically, whatever it is, to then push yourself into this sort of simulated environment where it's not who you really are, but you're going to pretend and play the role. And you could do it through techne, you could do it through makeup, you could do it through steroids, looks maxing, right? Whatever it may be. You can take these extreme ways of modification, but it requires a desperate externalization of your will into the world. And therefore, and through that process, then therefore, you become susceptible to utter destruction, because you're no longer generating your world or sub-creating your world from an internal perspective. You are relying, and more so as time goes, to a full extent on the external world to have it done. And ultimately, I think we may see this. It's a hope, maybe a fool's hope, as Gandalf says, but a hope nonetheless, that if this is how the powers that be are operating, that they are externalizing everything because there's nothing on the interior, that then it can be destroyed, because ultimately the flame imperishable, that flux of change in time. Oh yeah, just how that they think they got their hands around the flame imperishable, as Tolkien calls it, or the secret fire, but by its very nature, it's going to slip through their fingers, because the flux and change that is time can't be encompassed. And as I mentioned before, that's that sort of great deception, is thinking that it can be encompassed, that you can stand external to it. By externalizing everything, that you can sort of become yourself external to everything as well. So it's this great objectification process, and that can't be done. You are always a subject in the world. You are never a pure object viewing the world, right? And so that's the state they're trying to get. They want to be out of the flux to control it, and you can't get there. the flame imperishable is imperishable. It's not something that will perish to your containment. And that is the flight of Eros, right? The flight of Eros away from containment. You cannot clip Eros's wings. That fire of Eros, that flame imperishable, will always outrun you, and you can chase it. And you use it um, source of power to control and dominate, but it's always going to slip and it will take its flight away from you, and you will not be able uh, to grasp it. Now, Eros can abide with you, but Eros, you're on the back of Eros. You're going on the flight. You're not the controller of the flight, right? That whole process, because you are a subject of the world, right? You can be a sub creator, but you cannot be Eros itself, right? And go ahead.
There's something I was gonna sort of tease out this idea, and it's the idea that you see within, for example, you mentioned the flame imperishable, right? The primal fire. This, I guess you could call it the Zila as well. Now, I was thinking on this, and this idea that the way they try to encompass this is almost through like an artificial quintessence. It's the artificial soul, right? And of course, that's brought forth and produced vis-a-vis, money, God, data, hell, even identitarianism and things like this, right? And so what you see is it's almost this scientific process. Scientific as in it is purely of measurement. It's I'm not necessarily denigrating science per se, but science is a field of epistemics, I guess, which deals in purely what is measurable, what you can demonstrate, what you can see, and then effectively that becomes what they dictate as objective reality itself, right? The idea of laws, right? It is the law of nature. This is a law of nature, as opposed to, of course, this is merely something we've measured, we've perceived within or observed within an experiment, within a demonstration, through a pattern that from the aperture of our mind, right? So they don't make that qualifier. They never make that qualifier. So fundamentally, science almost becomes, as we've seen today, it's become a religion in and of itself, right? You either trust the science, you believe in the science, you believe in the experts as the intercessors to the new God, which is this sort of scientific reductionist truth of or mere simulacra of how you see the world through their pre-approved lens. Do you think the system itself has come to believe its own marketing? So, for example, do you actually believe deep down that they think that they can encompass, they can measure the immeasurable, they can quantify the unquantifiable, they can define the ineffable? Do you think they've believed their own? Pardon me? Do you believe they have succumbed to their own hype in that regard? Do you think that they've, again, a bit like Sauron, right? The One Ring was the externalization of his power, and he had to externalize it for others to, of course, observe it, to basically become enticed and enthralled to it. Do you believe in a similar manner that they have sort of bought into their own externalization as well, not realizing that they're brittle and fragile?
Yeah. I mean, I do. I'm always open to be corrected on that, or really any matter. But at least at this point of my understanding, not having sat them down and done a psychological analysis of, but just based on what we can see and observe throughout history, and then obviously up until literally today, um, that does seem to be the case. And I make that case based on the fact that what is driving that believing their own propaganda is fear. And when fear becomes paramount in a subject's view of the world, you can believe all kind of things, because fear coming from this deep-seated um, desire to avoid, whether it's perturbation or some level of pain or death itself, that that fear can drive the subject, I believe, into madness. And that's at least in my understanding now, that's seems to be where they're at, is that they have succumbed to a form of madness where they believe that you can encompass time, that you can encompass this flux, or to keep it a little bit more local, just the earth, that you can actually, this, like going back to Bartholomew, right, of Parma, and you can, this self-regulating, pyrastic flowing, living and breathing earth, this the land of Middle Earth, Arda, right? That you can encompass it and hold it in your hand and control it and wield it as a weapon, just like you put the ring on it, you wield the one ring to control. I think it's a form of madness, and I think it's driven primarily on fear. And it's fear of the unknown. It's fear of death, which is the ultimate unknown, right? For mankind, at least. And it's that ability of abstraction that has gone wayward and has, well, if we're going to talk again in the context of Tolkien, that ability of abstraction, which allows us to be a sub-creator, is then Morgoth puts his finger on that point and introduces the idea of, hey, you're gonna die, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, and it's going to be a horrible end for you, and you don't know what's beyond that veil, and so institutes a existential dread of the unknown, and veering off from that original sight of the sub-creator looks into the unknown and wields the imperishable flame, domineering, but as like a paintbrush, like a tool in his hand, with the world around him, given his own inherent talents. And he goes out into the unknown and he abstracts from the world, and he uses that to create the new, which is the unknown. So it really comes down to this disposition of a fear and a dread of the unknown, or a heroic embrace of the unknown. And I really think the powers that be have a dread, right? And they have a contempt for anybody who does not have that dread, right? Who does not have that dread, and they consider you, infantile. They consider you chattel, right? Just unknown, just these ignorant cattle who are just here to be slaughtered, so that we can conquer the unknown, so that we can encompass it through the material, through the externalization of the world. And because I think that this is the primary driver, that they have there's no internal zele, there's no soul, there's no internal soul to them, because the only driver they have is the dread, the fear of death. And then so that governs all of their decisions. Now, this makes them hyper intelligent. It makes them like a hyper predator, because if you're running only on the pure satisfaction of like the physical pleasure, and then really at the highest level just that base survival, right? And the will to dominance over all life. The only driving principle within you is fear. And so if that is over, if that is not overcome, if that shadow aspect essentially is not seen, understood, and then dealt with or embraced, really, if you run from it, it will destroy everything. You have to embrace it. Again, Tolkien. This is seen in The Return of the King. You can see it in the movies, obviously, read the books, but this is when King Theoden arrives at the Pelennor Fields. This is the last battle in the movies. And he arrives with the Rohirrim, and Sauron's forces are pressing against Minas Tirith, and the city is going to fall. And he arrives, and they are greatly outnumbered, right? And Peter Jackson actually does a good job of this in the movies. It's obviously one of the most epic scenes. And he realizes that they're all going to die, essentially, because they're outnumbered like, 20, 30, 40 to 1, whatever it is. And they're going to make this final assault against all hope on this massive army that is overthrowing Minas Tirith. And literally, it's going to be the end of man, right? Of mankind. And he gives a rousing speech to his Rohirrim, to his cavalry. And I'm gonna butcher it. I used to have it more memorized, but he basically says that today he says, shields shall be broken, spears shall be splintered. Today is a red day, a sore day, ere the sun rises, right? And then he says, and it's hard to hear it in the movie because they don't catch it so well. If you turn on subtitles, you see it's obviously in the books.
And just really quickly, that shield shall be splintered and such. That's from the Eddas. I'm pretty sure that's what's spoken just before Ragnarok occurs, if I recall correctly.
Yep. He pulls it from there, and then he says, ride now, right? Ride for ruin and the world's ending, right? And then he says, he raises his sword and he screams, death, like to death, right? And then the Rohirrim respond, death. And then he says, death. And they respond, death. And then they begin the cavalry charge, literally embracing death. So see, here is man who has come to this Ragnarok, at least in their minds, this is the end of the world. He says, to the world's ending, here is our charge, right? Because from their perspective, this is the end of man, right? Where the last mankind, the last of men are the Rohirrim and the men who are in Minas Tirith, and Minas Tirith is falling. And all they have left is the Rohirrim. They've left the women and children at home. Sauron will take over if man falls here at this point. And, dooms have been pronounced upon man that, the blood of the kings has dwindled in men, right? Like Elrond says, there is no blood, there is no hope left in men, right? There's men, the bloodlines of the kings of the Dunedain, the men of the West, have faded, and no longer they have fully succumbed to Morgoth's essentially temptation of trying to flee from death, and so they will not be able to stand up against this. But then Theoden and his Rohirrim, at that moment when they come over the hill and they see that we are going to die, they actually embrace it and they charge. And it is that embrace of saying we are headed towards death and we are actually welcoming death. That is our cavalry charge, is towards death. They actually make a significant impact, right? And they're able to turn things around. We know the rest of the stories. Frodo ends up destroying the ring accidentally. That's another topic we could get to. But the point is, though, is that because they did not run from death, but they charged towards their death, and this is Heidegger, right? Being towards death. Even Heidegger talks about this. Because they charged towards their death, they actually are able to turn the tides and at least stave off the complete downfall and destruction of men for another age, another aeon. Even though they were convinced this is it, there's no way, there's no way to turn around, because it was understood that Frodo had likely been captured or had failed in his quest. It was just like there was no, we don't know where he is, we don't know what has happened.
Yeah.
It's just him and Sam. That's all they know. So that's a lost cause. So from the Rohirrim and Theoden's perspective, and Aragon and all the soldiers at Minas Tirith, this is it. Frodo's dead, more than likely, 99% chance. There's no way he's made it. And so we are going to die, and men will fall, and our women and children will be destroyed, and this is it. So, but they still embrace it against all hope. And that's Tolkien's, essentially, that's his primary message, is the embrace of death, and at the same time the embrace of hope, even against Ragnarok, essentially.
So effectively, what we're seeing here is that what effectively Tolkien is almost he's extolling the virtue of embracing death, right? But and not just death, but the duration in which death provides, and it provide, because it's a given narrow duration. It allows the mortal to focus that constancy of change within that, and of course to bring about great deeds. But it's almost like he's stating that within each epoch, that the growing of decadence, and of course this refusal of death, this sort of seeking to outrun it, foolishly, hubristically, that at the end of the epoch, there's a sort of revelation of the power of death, and that if the common man can grasp that, then the common man may find an exit from that epochal
Exactly.
end. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Is that if you stop running and seeking to dominate everything by your will, but embrace death, that's the hero. And the hero is what changes the tide. Heraclitus says this, right? He says, speaking of the military, he says, I forgot which fragment it is, but of military men, he says, 90 out of 100, no, he says like 80 out of 100 shouldn't even be, no, 80 out of 100 are just targets or shouldn't really be there. 20 of those are decent fighters. 10 of those, these are the warriors and they make the battle. But the one is the hero, and he's the one who changes the tide, basically, or brings everybody back, right? And it just it takes that one pivotal person in history, like a King Theoden, who gives the rallying speech and says, "No, we're going to embrace this death." And that's that spear that sort of enters in, that changes everything. This is Tolkien's eucatastrophe. This is that sort of happy ending that comes about, but it comes about through the small heroic deeds that are done that add up, and mercy too, mercy as well. Tolkien talks about this extensively, because Frodo actually fails in his quest, and you'll notice the elite don't know anything about these things. The elite don't understand mercy. They don't understand heroism, right? They only know subterfuge and survival and destruction and dominance, right? They don't understand all these other principles, because Frodo actually fails, right? Frodo gets to Mount Doom, and against all odds, he makes it. And at the last second, when he's going to throw it in, he says, "I'm going to keep the ring as mine." And he succumbs. Actually, it's a bit of a tragedy, and he succumbs to that dominating power. But what happens is that Smeagol, actually, Gollum, jumps on him, right, and tries to take it from him, and bites off his finger, takes the ring, and then stumbles over the edge, and the ring is destroyed. But the only reason why Gollum was even there to take it from him was because he was spared through mercy several times with Frodo and once with Bilbo in The Hobbit. And if you'll remember in the movie, if you haven't read through all the books, but in the movie, it takes place at a different time. But in the movies, they're in the mines of Moria, and Frodo's talking with Gandalf, and he says, Bilbo should have just killed Gollum when he had the chance. We wouldn't basically have to deal with this whole problem, right? And Gandalf says, but it was pity that spared Bilbo's hand in killing him, because Bilbo was able to kill him because he had his sword and he had the ring, which makes him invisible. He could have snuck up on him and killed him. So, but he says, not even the very wise can see all ends. Don't be so hasty to hand out judgment, right? Because you can't see exactly how this small act of heroism where Bilbo showed pity.
The butterfly effect. You can't basically
Yes,
predict everything. The
right.
even the wise have their limitations. Yeah, that's
Yep.
brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah, it's because this is also, I believe, I call me naive, but I'm holding out and hoping for a eucatastrophe through this butterfly-like effect. But that butterfly-like effect, because I don't believe they can actually encompass the flame imperishable, and that flame imperishable, that sort of is what allows for these small acts of heroism, these small acts of sub-creation, these small acts of pity and mercy and empathy, and this is what allows for these small cracks and wedges for cause and effect relationship to open up, because nobody killed Gollum, because even Aragorn, when he captures him, he says he felt pity for him, right, and stuff. So he, instead of killing him, he turned him over to the elves, the elves of Greenwood to house in their prisons. If you've seen the Hobbit movies, that's where the dwarves are kept, in the prisons. And but he ended up escaping, right? And so, but because everybody had an internal environment of empathy and mercy, that they granted that empathy and mercy to somebody who's actually, he's a wraith, he's suffering, he's Gollum, he's like a heroin addict, he's completely enthralled, he's a thrall to this ring, to Sauron. They felt pity for him, and it was through that pity that in the end, yes, Gollum destroyed himself, but he also destroyed the ring, and it was actually through his relentless desire to grasp the flame imperishable in his own right, just like Sauron, just like Morgoth. To grasp it is that in his attempt to grasp it, he actually destroys it, right? He actually saves the day, if you will. Things are able to turn around at Ragnarok because of the small acts of heroism that are done throughout the entire story. And it goes from literally the creation of Arda in Tolkien's Legendarium all the way up until Frodo. And that's thousands of years of different acts. And when you actually read through the Tolkien Legendarium, right, it's, Beren and Luthien and Fingolfin and Galadriel and all these characters that he has just through thousands of years of history, all of these acts of heroism and pity and mercy and empathy and understanding and creation, even, um, all these things add up and bubble up to this point on Mount Doom. Um, because there's endless examples. I could just talk forever about this, but the only reason why Frodo actually makes it even through Shelob's lair is he has the vial of Galadriel to shine the light, right? Well, that
yeah,
vial of Galadriel that has the water from her little pool, that light is the light of Gil Estel, which is the Star of Hope. But that Star of Hope is a Silmaril that is on the forehead of Erendil. And Arendelle was a half man, half elf who basically secured relationship between the Valar and mankind again. And he sails the heavens, right? And that's the planet Venus. It's the Silmaril of Arendelle, and he sails on a boat in the heavens with the Silmaril on his brow, and that light is the light of Venus, which is right the star of hope that rises before the sun rises. And Galadriel takes the light from Gil Estel, that Silmaril, and she catches it in her water in her pool, and she scoops that up in the vial and gives it to Frodo. So the only way he's even able to make it to Mount Doom is because Erendel, right, kept the Silmaril from Morgoth and secured relationship thousands of years ago between the Valar and men and elves, right? So Tolkien, that's why his work is a masterpiece, is because what he did was weave all of these stories together to bubble up to this concrescence at the end point through these acts of heroism. And we literally here in 2026 can use that same patterning to help guide our way through this process and understand, from my perspective, that things like death needs to be embraced, and these acts of heroism and understanding and pity and empathy need to be done, and heroic men and women need to rise up from and not be these voided out externalized beings, but internalize these as principles and to stand on the fields of Ragnarok where we're at even right now and charge towards the death. And we hold Gil Estel in our eye, the star of high hope, the hope that we don't understand everything, we can't encompass everything, we don't know what history has been changed and what doesn't, but we are hoping that there is still light enough left in man somewhere that these acts of heroism contra the elite and their acts of depravity and fear-based dominance, that there could be a eucatastrophe that comes in that at least allows a portion of mankind to survive into the next age, right?
And
Because we are. Go ahead. I'll talk forever. Go ahead.
no, I'll let you finish your point, but I just want to interject and say it in what we see within, well, perhaps not the Hobbit, though. This is sort of, it's building up to what you see in the Lord of the Rings proper. Is that it's almost Sauron that actually he initiates this sort of final, not forlorn, but a sort of final battle against man himself, against the civilization of man, and so in that sense, it's almost very similar to the idea that we see within these epochal cycles. That within the Great Reset, it's almost like you've got an overconfident, hubristic elite who believe that they have, like what you're saying, encompassed, or they have a total purview over all of reality itself, and they believe that they are the spider at the center of the web, the threads of all potentiality. That they actually believe that they are the secret flame or the primal fire in and of themselves. So, in that sense, again, like what we see with Sauron, his eye was somewhere, his spirit was somewhere else, right? His eye, his gaze was somewhere else. He wasn't, of course, keeping watch. What, of course, the hobbits reaching Mount Doom, if I recall correctly from the movies. I don't know if it's different, a sort of different narrative within the books of how that goes down. But what I got a sense from the movies that Sauron was fixated on this final, last push against man, that he was going to complete his dominion over the world. He was going to conquer the universe effectively, right? That he wasn't necessarily, again, because of his overconfidence, he wasn't necessarily, um, it, it to, totally efficient, should we say? What would the word be? He
Well,
pushed
well,
the envelope too much,
yeah, yeah, and what Tolkien points out is that he, and he says this in some of his letters too, to people writing him, um, he he could not. His great downfall is that he could not conceive that anybody would want to do anything other than what he would do, and that is to take dominance through the
Oh
ring.
wow, wow.
You see, Tolkien makes this very clear because when he speaks, because in the books, this is seen in the extended version of the movies. And if you're going to watch the movies, you have to watch the extended because even the extended doesn't do justice. But obviously, the books need to be read. But in the movies, Aragorn gets the one of the Palantirs, the Stones of Seeing, right?
Yeah.
And um, Sauron has one of them, but he gets one of them and he confronts Sauron through the Palantir. And Sauron, he's extremely worried about Aragorn. He doesn't know. He's sort of hunting for him. He wants to find him and kill him, but Aragorn's been in hiding as a ranger for his basically his entire life. But he's looking for Aragorn, and he wants to kill him because he thinks that Aragorn is looking for the ring. And he hears from Gollum because Sauron captures Gollum and tortures him, and he gets from Gollum. This is how the movie starts. That he gets Hobbit and Shire. So that's why he sends the Nazgul to the Shire at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring to try to find the ring because he thinks the ring is there, and he thinks that he knows that Aragorn is out there somewhere. And Estel is one of his names, which means hope, right? The hope of mankind. And he knows that the blade was broken, right? Which is the shards of Narsil, the broken blade. But he knows that his line is still out there. So he's looking for him, but he thinks Aragorn is looking for the ring too, because he thinks Aragorn's going to get the ring and defeat him through might, defeat him through armies. That's why he's looking for the ring. He cannot even conceive, because he's based solely on fear and dominance. He doesn't even conceive that they would try to destroy the ring, that no one would take it to themselves. He thinks that everybody wants the ring because that's what he thinks. He cannot think outside of his own programmed way of thinking, because he was the lieutenant of Morgoth, being a Maiar. He's basically like an angelic being, being fully corrupted by Morgoth. He can only think in the terms of dominance and hatred, right, and control. So that's why he doesn't look for the hobbits sneaking in, and that's Tolkien's whole point, is why the hobbits they're the ones who end up destroying the ring, or they take the ring there, is because a hobbit is nothing. It's a 3 foot tall, powerless, no bloodline, no kingship. They're not great warriors. They're not very intelligent. They're not tenacious, right? All they want to do is just have a beer and garden and walk around with nature and eat and enjoy themselves, right? Right? And live with the fluctuations of nature, right? And that's all they want. That's all they care about. Sam constantly talks about, he just wants to get back home to his garden, right? He doesn't care
And
about.
this is, I do recall from a part of the books, because I never read them, but I recall this from childhood, because these books were read to us. I mean, I was really quite young, but so I don't really, I have a very vague recollection of it. But I remember this one thing, and I thought it was interesting, and it always stuck with me. I recall in the books that the ring, the ring almost, the way I understand it is the ring, the way it tempts you and tries to control you, is that it will play upon You again, those externalizations, right? Those things that you desire, and it will then exaggerate them. But if you have no desire, it doesn't work on you. So, for example, right, I believe with Sam, it says, if you wear me, if you, if you become, basically give your will over to me, the ring, that I will make you, king of the garden and all of this, and king of the
Yeah,
greenery, or whatever it was.
yeah.
And then, of course,
Of the
Sam's like
Shire,
that.
yeah, and you'll of the
Yeah,
Shire, yeah, you'll be a master gardener, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and Sam's like, of course that doesn't make any sense. Why would I want that? So it's like what you're saying. It's the innocence itself that ensures that it basically keeps you outside of the predictive range that the system has.
Exactly. 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 And that's why Tolkien chooses the he says that the hobbits are the most resistant to the corruption of the ring. Why? Because the hobbits don't care about kingship, lordship, or even technology. This is in the first pages of the book. He's talking about the hobbits, and in the preface, it's on hobbits, and he makes it very clear they have no technology higher than a forged bellows. It's like they basically just cart and buggy, and they're okay with that. And so because they don't have that desire to lord over everything and control everything, they are the most resistant to the temptation of the ring, because the ring is, hey, here's the ultimate techne. Here's AI, right? Or whatever it is. Here's the ultimate techne, and you can control everything and bend everything to your will. And that's why Gandalf says, "Don't tempt me with it, Frodo." If you remember from the movies, right? But he says it in the book too. But he's like, "Do not," because Frodo offers it to him. Frodo's like, "I'm just a freaking hobbit. I don't. This is way above my head, man. You're talking about ancient magic from thousands of years ago and dark lords. This is way above me. You take it. You're a wizard." And Gandalf says, "Don't tempt me with it. Don't give it to me, because through me it would work an evil unimaginable." Because he is a wizard, he's involved in the raising of kings and the falling of kings and moving this over here and getting people to do that to try to uh, encourage these acts of heroism that are required for the butterfly effect, right? But but the ring would work through him. It would be too much of a great temptation through him. Um, and so Tolkien is a master at this, because what he's showing is that there's sort of two veins. In order to get the eucatastrophe, you need everyday people, and that's why he chooses hobbits, everyday simple people to do small acts of heroism in the world that they are in. And those things begin to add up. You don't have to be, Fingolfin, an elf king, and to strike Morgoth yourself with your blade. You don't have to do that. You have to, like, you know, be a Sam who says, "You know what? I just want to go back home and just tend to my garden. I don't need to garden the entire Shire. I just want to go back to my garden." So that contentment with being a sub creator in the time and world in which you've been in, it takes away that great desire to dominate the world. And that's because the hobbits don't live in this state of extreme fear. They just sort of live day by day in this harmonic relationship with each other and the nature in which they're in, the Shire, right? And so, and I think deep down, I mean, everybody's sort of, that sounds nice, that sounds good, but now we're locked into this system of like capitalism and what have you, where we're in this engine now, and it's forcing us into this disposition. And because we're being driven towards this Ragnarok. But the whole point is, going back to Sauron, is that he does not understand that, because it's not part of his being. He has no soul, no Sele. He's just Geist, right? And so because he's just Geist, he can't conceive of somebody not wanting to take dominance. And if you don't want to take that dominance, the system has nothing to offer you. It doesn't have anything for you. It might have some conveniences, but it's not anything that is going to tempt you into engaging with it at that high level. So because you're absolutely correct, because he can't conceive of this, he thinks that both the battle at Pelennor Fields in front of Minas Tirith, and then when Aragorn and Gandalf, and they take the last remnants of the soldiers and they come to the Black Gate to assault Sauron in the land at the land of Mordor. He thinks, oh, this is their last attempt. I got him, like, right, because I'm a pincer move, and we're gonna destroy mankind right here. What a stupid move! But that is done as a distraction, so to give Frodo one last chance to come up from behind, basically, and sneak into Mount Doom. And so the powers that be in this day and age, you're correct. They're, at least as far as we can tell, are thinking the exact same way, right? They are all about domination, with like real to dominance, no empathy, no mercy, no understanding even of these concepts. It's just who can produce the highest level of technology and how can we use it to dominate the world.
well, I
And
think
maybe
that's
Tolkien is right.
I think that's the issue as well, because this is what we see with this sort of I'm heavily influenced by Spengler. I just find his works quite interesting, and the way he writes is as well quite yeah. I mean, it's very poetic to me, right? It's very artistic, but he states that the Western Zila builder, which is the sort of soul image of Western man, is this. And I disagree with him here. I don't think it's always been the soul image of Western man. But at the time of course, he was writing, indeed was. But this idea of the Faust or the Faustian man, this notion that again, it's the sort of Mephistophelian bargain in which Faustian man, at the expense of his own soul, seeks to conquer the infinite. And in fact, you see this within the West currently. I mean, even the sort of what's painted and what masquerades as sort of moral grandstanding, such as, for example, inclusivity and all of this, right? I mean, let's take inclusivity. I mean, effectively, what inclusivity is the destruction of boundaries. It's the destruction of the exclusive, right? Which, of course, makes absolutely no sense because we all live within dwellings that effectively are comprised of envelopes, they're comprised of locked doors, locked windows. So we are territorial in and of ourselves. We are beings of exclusivity, or at least on some level. So really, you start looking at this inclusivity idea, and what is up with this? What's up with the idea of getting rid of dualism, getting rid of the genders, right? Why non-binary? Well, then you realize it's to take down the boundaries themselves, because if you are to conquer the infinite, be it in a sort of metaphysical way, a metapsychological way, whatever it may be, even in a physical or purely manifestable way, then you have to take down every boundary to conquer the infinite. To conquer the infinite, you must become the infinite. This idea. So in a sense, I mean, it's what you see with that is something. Well, interestingly, you just mentioned it really there. I was going to go into this. Why the hell are we seeing the likes of Palantir speak? You see Palantir, you see Curtis Yarvin, all of these characters. I believe even Nick Land mentions this. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Where they have this idea of Tolkien. They keep talking about Tolkien, which is very strange because a lot, well, for example, the people behind Palantir and Curtis Yarvin or Mencius Moldbug, they're all Jewish. So it doesn't really make sense. Why are they speaking on what really is a sort of neo-mythology for Anglo-Saxons or really just the Britons and the Irish? It doesn't really make sense, or even the Anglosphere in general. It doesn't make sense. What is behind this? What's your opinions upon that?
Oh man. Um, now we're gonna go on a bit on the edge of the limb here. This is good, maybe a little schizo. All right. So I think that's all done absolutely intentionally. I like I said, here's a little bit more of a conspiracy here. Um, Lord of the Rings was published in the 50s, right? It's been around for a long time. That's not it. But not many people read. Peter Jackson's films, which popularized it to a massive extent, right? That came out right around September 11th, right? Literally 2000, 2001, 2002, right? That's when they came out, right? Um, and that was right at that turning, right, where we switched into 2020 was obviously a turning, but 2001 was sort of like the turn before the greater turning, in which we had September 11th. I I I sort of see that as a last ditch like clarion call for mankind to pay attention because it popularized it. And you'll notice in the last few years they are absolutely desecrating Tolkien, right? The Rings of Power is just an absolute desecration. It's just like all woke, right? All woke stuff. And now they announced they have these new movies coming off, and Stephen Colbert is gonna direct it or
Oh
something like that.
God, yeah. Oh
Yep,
my God,
yep. So
he couldn't even pronounce what did he pronounce it? Yarandel. Do you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
It's
mean,
just
Jesus.
right. So they're doing. I think it's through two ways. They're taking. I think that they understand that this mythos specifically resonates with people at a very, very deep level. I think this mythos specifically contains within it, as like some of the analysis, like I'm sort of even giving you now, like literally exactly what's happening, like on not only psychological, but even ontological levels and stuff, right? In terms of the goings on. I think there's major keys in the work of Tolkien. And I think that they are desecrating it in the media realm, right, to obscure it and to desecrate it. But then also, they are trying to hijack it and sort of poison the well with it through speaking of it, like whether it's land or wherever else they're trying to, like, like Elon Musk calling England and Scotland, the whole area over that, like the Shire, right? And the orcs are invading and stuff like that,
Hmm.
right? And which England is the Shire, by the way. England, Scotland, that whole area is actually the Shire. Um, it's right there. But um, using all that terminology, because what they're trying to do is take this extremely powerful mythos and redirect it into
Yeah.
certain agendas, whether it's MAGA, right, or they want it for like a hyper conservative agenda, so they can push it for this. We need hyper conservatives for war, right, and pushing it that way, or completely desecrate it. So they're either going to direct it into whatever pockets of conceptuality that they want, like I mentioned with like the noosphere, these like gated areas of thinking, like, oh, Lord of the Rings, that's MAGA stuff, right? Oh, Tolkien, that's like conservative stuff, right? And so what it does is it puts a dead stop to it, so that anybody who is like maybe looking into it, it paints it with a preconception of, oh, Tolkien's actually referring to race relations in this specific, right. They
Yeah.
can take it and they can, right, interpret it. So what they're trying to do is beat you
Yeah.
to the punch, right, before you're able to
Mm,
possibly sit down with, like, let's say the entire legendarium, let's say, and say, what can this teach me about what we know in history and then also what's happening now? And you can internalize it. And if you internalize it and go through your own personal process of internal alchemy with it, you can then externalize it. And they're very worried about what you could possibly externalize if you internalize this yourself. So they want to beat you to the punch or they want to desecrate it.
exactly.
Either
Yes.
one.
Well,
They either have to
they
poison it
must
or
be
they have to
terrified of
interpret
it.
it for you.
They must be utterly terrified of it then.
Yep. Yep, and what they're trying to do is, I think, a bit of almost like a reverse magic by naming a lot of their stuff after it. So you have Palantir.
Yes.
Now, the Palantiri, there are multiple stones, seeing stones. They were given to the Numenorians so that they could better communicate with each other, basically to establish like a balanced harmonic kingdoms. So the
So
Numenorian are mhm.
was this before? Sorry, was this before the Numenorians were sort of deceived by Morgoth?
Essentially, yeah. Yeah,
Right.
because the Numenorians descend from Beren and Luthien. Beren was a man, Luthien was an elf, and Beren fell in love with Luthien, and she fell in love with him, and then they actually steal the Silmarils from Morgoth. They actually basically defeat Morgoth through their love. This is another big thing: is the power of love, not just like care for your fellow man, but actual like love for another human at a very, very high level is actually how is one of the means through which also Ragnarok or evil or is defeated. But that goes into the story of Beren and Luthien. But um Beren and Luthien, their child, one of their children is Arendil. And Arendil is the one who, right, gets the Silmaril, sails above in the sky and what have you. But that line basically leads to the Numenorians. And then so the Numenorians are half, they have elf blood mixed in with them. So they're like half man, half elf.
Right.
And this is why they have extreme wisdom, but they also will live for like 400 or 500 years. They're not, they don't live forever like an elf would, but they have greatly extended life. And they have the virtues of the elves, like, you know, like empathy and right, and all these other traits that we've been talking about even in this conversation. So mercy and pity and these things. So those are the Numenorians. Now the Numenorians become corrupted by Sauron and over time because again they want to try to eventually cheat death. 500 years is not enough for them. They want more. And there's that desire, right, beyond the threshold of what you've been given, right? There's that desire, so they want more. They end up becoming corrupted, and then you have essentially the Black Numenorians, and then you have who are called like the Kingsmen, and then you have the Numenorians who are the elf friends who sort of stay true to the elves. The the ones who stay true to their elven line essentially, which have respect for the Valar, and the Valar are the gods who are basically just the elements of the world. So basically, they stay in harmony with nature. Is what is told there. They escape when Numenor is destroyed and drowned, and they escaped to Middle Earth. But some of the Black Numenorians also escaped, and this is where Tolkien says that this is essentially this is your Quetzalcoatl, right, and stuff. These are these people who come from Atlantis who teach people in Middle
Yes.
Earth, right?
The Thoth,
Like,
Hermes. Yeah.
yep, yep. These are the Thoth and Humis, and some of them are good. Some of the are the good Numenorians, and this is Aragon's line, right? And some of them are the Black Numenorians. Numenorians. Some of them become Nazgul, right? The head of the Nazgul, the Witch King, is one of the kings of Numenor, one of the head Numenorians. But they also disperse into the land, and they start cults for Morgoth throughout the land, and they go like into the south towards the Middle East. Hint, hint, wink, wink, right?
Is
So,
that Rune and such? Yeah.
yep, yep, Harad, Far Harad, it's called, and
Right. Yeah.
Rune, right, and stuff. Yep. So, and they start cults towards Morgoth and the worship of Morgoth, you know, towards Middle East and what have you, and that's the history from there. But the good
Mhm.
Numenorians remain, yeah, and so that's Aragon's line. And what was the original question? Because I got caught up in the
Oh,
genealogy.
well, it's this idea regarding why are they well I asked why are they using Palantir
Oh, Palantir. Yes, yes.
mhm,
Yeah, so they're given, yeah, they're
construction.
given, so the Palantiri are forged by the elves when they're still friends with the Numenorians. Because the Numenorians are living on Numenor, which is an island in the Atlantic, basically. It's off the coast of Middle Earth. It's halfway between Valinor, which is the land of the elves and where the
Mhm.
Valar are, and it's halfway between that and Middle Earth. They're there in the middle. The elves basically give them these, they craft these things and they give them to them. But what happens is that these things then become lost. Some are lost or destroyed, and they're taken. And so Sauron ends up with one. You got to read everything to figure out how he gets one. Sauron ends up with one. Saruman ends up with one. Other ones are lost. There was one on like a Weathertop, which is where Frodo gets stabbed in the movies. That used to be a tower as well, and there was one there, but it has since been lost. So that's why in the movies, Gandalf, when he sees that Saruman has one, he covers it and he says, "We don't know. They're not all accounted for. You don't know who could be watching from the other side, right? Like you have to be careful." But yeah, they take these things and they hijack these things for themselves. And again, it's like a form of like black magic or reverse magic, where they are taking these things which were originally something that was good, and they're corrupting it, taking the name of it to corrupt that name. It also has a slight effect that, oh, Palantir, if once it begins to come out on how bad they really are and what they're doing, oh well, that's Lord of the Rings, and there you have more poisoning of the well, right? Through that process too, right? The I believe it's the helmets of the top tier special forces. The company name is Anduro, right? And I think that's what they call the. Is it? Oh, it's the Eagle. But Anduro, no, Anduro is the name of the company that makes these. These are these helmets that the SEAL Team 6 wears, and they
Oh yes,
incorporate
and Enduro Industries. Yes, 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 yes.
Enduro Industries. Now, Enduro is, if you see, I changed my picture recently for my my picture here on Discord. That's Enduro, right? Because it's Aragon's sword basically, which its original name is Narsil, and the shards of Narsil is my picture when it's broken, and that represents how mankind is broken and fragmented in
Fallen
fear of
state.
death, like in the fallen state, right? But the sword needs to be remade. Now, Nar means like, basically it means sun, and Sil means moon, or it's the light of the sun and the light of the moon. And they're combined together because the light of the sun and the moon is from the two trees, blah, blah, blah. You got to read the legendarium. But the point is, though, is that it gets reforged into Anduril, and Anduril means flame of the west. So when you take the light of the sun and the moon, you put them together, it's the flame of the west. And the Dunedain, which is what Aragon is. He's a Dunedain. That's the men of the West, and Anduril is flame of the West, right? Because you have to understand Tolkien's language as well. He also has languages that go along with that because reality is programmed by language. So he has Kenya and these other forms of Elvish language, right? So that's the flame of the West. Well, they take Aragon's sword, which is supposed to be this the uniting of humanity under this banner of hope for mankind, and they put it on equipment basically that the West is using to basically bring in the New World Order.
I
right,
know it's.
right.
Oh my god. Yeah, the
So there
subversion is
again,
is unbelievable.
yeah, and I find it very very interesting that, right, both when they, at the same time, it's like sort of providential. It's that butterfly effect. At the same time where they initiate 9/11, Lord of the Rings is in the movie theaters, and it's winning Academy Award left and right, so everybody's going to see it. And then when 2020 hits, they decide they want to desecrate it and bring in Rings of Power through Amazon, and now all these other spin-offs further desecrating it as we go through this process. I find it very interesting, to say the least. You know? So there's
Yeah,
definitely something there.
they don't miss a trick. They don't miss a trick.
Mm-mm,
There
mm-mm.
was so Palantir itself. I actually years. What was it? Was it last year? God, it was last year. It was last July or June. I did this little Discord post on it. Um, Again, I don't know as much about Lord of the Rings as you, but the name Palantir, plural Palantiri, in J.R.R. Tolkien's works, particularly Lord of the Rings, originates from the Kenya language. It combines the words Palan, meaning far distant, and Tir, meaning to watch or to keep watch or to keep vigil. Therefore, Palantir translates to far seeing or he who looks afar. Something else that I had here. The
Real quick,
major
this real
theme of
quick
the
point,
yeah, jump in.
real quick point, just right here on the far watching. Drake Dracon means a watcher, that which watches, which is connected to Draco, where we get the word dragon from. So Tolkien was a master of languages, right? That's what he was. So he's well aware when he's using this different language, and that's why Sauron's eye is depicted as a reptilian eye as well, because to watch is a derivative of drak or drakon, is one who watches, and so he puts a tiny little reptilian spin on the eye itself. So, but anyways, go ahead.
So right, I see. So that even links as well to this idea of the Ayin, which is the nothingness, the void, the local void, where of course Draco the constellation is. Ayin itself is a letter in Hebrew. Its pictographic form is an eye. So everything is surrounding this sort of the suspicious one, the one, this all-seeing eye. You know.
Yes.
There I forget if it's a left or a right eye. I can imagine it's probably the left eye, given this sort of surrounding materiality. I notice as well in certain illustrations of the eye. What is that tower called again? That this eye or spirit of Sauron sits upon in his incorporeal or disembodied form.
Barad-dûr.
Barad-dûr, yes, that's it.
Yeah.
So, and I've noticed as well some of the illustrations actually shows the iris, pardon me, not the iris, the pupil being that of the outline of Sauron itself. So it's almost like Sauron is similar to Ezekiel 1 verse 28 when it describes Yahweh sitting upon the throne. And I believe in front of the throne is a sea of glass, and I forget how the throne is described, but he's described as a silhouette of fire, effectively, encased in fire. Again, very similar to Sauron. I always noticed that with the description, and I remember
Yep.
reading Ezekiel and the book of Ezekiel. I'm thinking, damn, this sounds very much like Sauron and
Yeah.
Barad-dûr. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, no, it can't be, it can't be. Of course, this is before I was fully aware of
Right.
the extent of everything. But there was something else I was going to ask too. So the Dunedain is that the entirety of the men of the West, of course, that went on to found Gondor? What's the one in the north? I forget what it's called now. Andor, Ananor. I forget what it's called
Oh,
now.
Arnor. Yeah.
Arnor. Um,
Yeah.
of does the Dunedain refer to all of these kingdoms, or is it merely the Rangers themselves? Or how's that? How does that? Are they all Dunedain? The Rohirrim, are they Dunedain as well?
Yeah. No. So the Dunedain are basically essentially just by the time of the Lord of the Rings, it's essentially just the Rangers. Um, Although the Gondorians flow from that same line as well, but the blood, if you will, is concentrated most in the Rangers. Aragon is the heir to the throne, though, but the Gondorians are all from that Dunedain line. That's why it's the return of the king, and he's returning to be the king of Gondor, right? So that's it, and that's why oh, his name's slipping my mind right now, but
The
uh,
steward.
the what?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to mention the steward and how he's ousted after the return of the king. I do apologize.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, yeah. Basically, but no. But the Rohirrim, they because there are in Tolkien's Legendarium, mankind awakes in like the east, and they awake after the elves, right? So the elves awake first, and then the mankind comes later. So there are men who exist, and kingdoms are essentially established in Middle Earth that are not part of that mixed bloodline of elves and men, right? From Baron and Luthien, basically. So you have it's a special group of men, a special bloodline,
True.
and but it doesn't mean, of course, that they're going to just be righteous or good or whatever, they can obviously be bad. And then when they're bad, they're really bad because they have not only the long life but very keen insight, very determined, very intelligent, right? People rally to them naturally because of that Dunedain bloodline. And other men like the Rohirrim, that's why even in the movies, Theoden says um, today, I believe it's in the second movie with
Hmm.
the at Helm's Deep, he says, "Let us join swords together this day." Is that he's aware that Aragon is um, uh, he is Dunedain, and he's like, "We're both men, but you're like Superman, right? You're like you're like Elf Man, and I'm man." He says, "But we will work together," and that's why Gondor calls on Rohan for aid. They're not like totally knit together because the Gondorians get this air of supremacy about them through pride because they're like, "Oh,
Hmm.
we're Gondorian, and we we're superior," kind of thing. So
It's interesting as well because you see, the Dunedain, these rangers. It's almost like they are in a sojourn of sorts, an exodus. One could say
yes,
a process of exodus within the forest. So it's almost they're go you know they're almost in the heart of darkness. They're learning to become, and what is the heart of darkness but the unknown, right? So they're learning to become accustomed to the unknown itself, right? They're ranging. They are charting the unknown in a sense, aren't they? So it's almost like they're going through a spiritual purification of sorts, similar to what you see with the
absolutely,
hobbits. They're almost
yep,
becoming hobbits in a sense. They're becoming far more aligned with nature.
yep. And Tolkien has it both ways for his audience. I mean, man was an absolute genius because he has the Hobbit starting in um, ease and relaxation and like an ideal environment, and then Gandalf comes and says, "Hey, like this is actually the ring that Hobbit that Bilbo has, and the Nazgul are coming, and we got to go." They're torn out of it, and they have to go through a purification process. But Merry and Pippin as well. They have to fight on the Pelennor fields, and they have to make very difficult decisions. And they're with Treebeard, and everything else happens. So they go through a purification process. The opposite is on the other end for Aragon. Aragon starts in a purification process because he's raised by Elrond, and basically because his mother dies, and he's raised by Elrond, and who's an elf who also descends from the same. He's a pure elf though, who made the choice to stay in Middle Earth. He could have gone to Valinor, but he chose to stay with men to essentially assist. And Aragon's raised by him, and he's raised with Elrond's two brothers. And basically, from the time he's like 12, right? Basically, when he's basically hits puberty, he's sent out into the wild with Elrond's two sons to hunt orcs. So he starts his life literally in the wild. And Elrond has the shards of Narsil, and he basically says that you cannot fulfill your destiny to become basically like the king, to become the Dunedain, the hope of men. You can't do that unless you go out first. So then he spends basically from his youth all the way up. I think he doesn't. I forgot how old he is. He's like 70 years old, or like 80 years old before even the Lord of the Rings happens, and he spent his entire time with the Rangers, being the leader of the Rangers, but also with Elrond's two sons. I forget their names; they slip my mind right now. And they basically hunt orc and guard, basically both the Shire hobbits and outposts of men, but thanklessly. Right? They take no name. They Because that was part of the purification process, is to remain as unknown. He's
So
literally the the king. Go ahead.
sorry, it's almost it reminds me very much of Jon Snow's character within the A Clash of Kings and the various
Mm,
Game of Thrones series. He becomes he's born a bastard, and he becomes a man of the Night's Watch. And again, it's a thankless task. He again in the
yes.
far north, he goes into this sort of purification process as well.
Yep.
Um,
Yep,
yeah.
and Tolkien has it both ways. If you start in luxury because you just happen to be born into a well-off family and situation, then you have to go out of that door and like seek the adventure and get out into the world for the purification process. Or if you're born in squalor and or born into a more of a rough life, you're born into the wilderness and you have to go through the purification process. But both processes requires heroism, bravery, pity, mercy, and heroic acts on a daily basis to reach that sort of purified process where either you become king or you become the way by which literally the world is saved, hobbit or man. And so he has it from both ends, starting from luxury but also starting from this very rough position. But yeah, Aragon, and in order to even marry Arwen, right, as you see in the movies, Arwen, who is an elf, she's a full-blood elf whom he falls in love with. In order to marry her, Elrond won't basically allow it unless he goes through this process first, right? And what actually happens with Aragon and Arwen is it's a recapitulation, it's a retelling of the Beren and Luthien story, essentially. It's the same thing. So, but yeah, that whole purification process must take place first. Then he's ready to face essentially his destiny, but he's been honed through humility, pity, and these other processes. Then he's ready to take on the task of having to essentially be the last hope for man. And remember, from his perspective, he doesn't know how this is all going to work out, right? He doesn't he doesn't know. All he knows is that he has to basically do his best in these times of being greatly outnumbered. He has to face Sauron and his armies, but he has no idea how it's going to work or if he's going to be even able to do it, right? So, which is the exact disposition we're in right now. We have no idea how this is going to shake out. It's extremely grim, right? But he holds hope in not only that butterfly effect process, but in understanding that the powers that be are ultimately deceived as to the nature of reality, and so reality is not going to bend to them ultimately, right? Get a lot of far, it can get pretty far. A lot of people can die. I mean, the entire Tolkien legendarium is rife with mass death, mass death. Elf, dwarf, man, like everybody's dying, everyone's suffering, 100%. Frodo gets his finger bitten off. Mary is permanently damaged. Frodo's permanently damaged, right? Everyone suffers some kind of. Boromir is killed outright defending the hobbits, right? Um, but everybody is damaged, and many people die. But just that small little glimmer of hope, that light in the dark, that Gil Estel, that star of hope, right, is what the holdout is. And the powers that be don't understand that. There's no hope. They can only forge their own way through by absolute dominance and just eating each other and eating everything else around them, right? So it's literally the same story we're in right now. So that's why I find it so compelling.
Well, here's what I wanted to ask you, because what we see, I posted the Middle Earth map within the third age, and there appears to be actually a changing of the. I mean, you could even say the cosmology, the shape of the Earth, or the shape of the world of Arda. As of course it goes from the first age, second age, and the third age. But I'm reading here letter 151. This is from Tolkien's letters. Quote, the new situation establishing at the beginning of the third age leads on eventually and inevitably to ordinary history, and we here see the process culminates in letter 165. Middle-earth, by the way, is not a name of a never land without relation to the world we live in, like the Mercury of Edison. It is just a use of Middle English, Middle-Erde, or Eartha, altered from Old English, Midden Geard. The name of the inhabited lands of men between the seas, and though I have not attempted to relate the shape of the mountains and land masses to what geologists may say or surmise about the near past, imaginatively this history is supposed to take place in a period of the actual old world of this planet, letter 183. Middle-earth is not an imaginary world. The name is the modern form appearing in the 13th century and still in use. Middle-earth, an ancient name of the Okumene, the abiding place of men, the objectively real world, and used specifically opposed to the imaginary worlds as fairyland or unseen worlds of as heaven or hell. The theatre of my tale is this earth, the one in which we now live, but the historical period is imaginary. The essentials of that abiding place are all there, at any rate, for inhabitants of Northwest Europe, so naturally it feels familiar, even if a little glorified by the enchantment of distance and time. Letter 211, this will be the last one. I have, I suppose, constructed an imaginary time, but kept my feet on my own Mother Earth for place. So effectively, it is our world that this is taking place in. Interestingly, I do recall, I think it was either Philip K. Dick or it might have been Asimov that mentioned this. No, actually, I think it was Philip K. Dick. And he mentioned that effectively everything that he was writing in his fictional works was in fact real world. It was like a vision that he was having of a sort of a different time
Yeah.
period or a different timeline, which is interesting. I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to explore that or if you've thought on that in any way.
Maybe we should shut off the recording.
All right.
Let me well, you can keep it, but don't post here on out,
Right.
maybe.
Okay.
And this is I wasn't gonna bring this up. This is like a just for me kind of thing. And it sounds absolutely schizo, and it sounds absolutely nuts. But so
Oh,
um
believe you me, nothing surprises me now. And to the viewers, if you know, if I do get permission to put this up to YouTube, it doesn't surprise them either. I can assure you.
okay,
Eh,
right.
so
Well,
don't worry.
all right. Like I think, and here's my all the way end of the twig schizo speculation, but this is for me. I think there's a lot more factual truth to what is in the Tolkien legendarium than any Tolkien scholar, anybody else wants to admit. And what do I mean by that? While I don't think that every conversation between Bilbo and Frodo is correct, I don't have much hesitation in believing that portions of the legendarium are actual history of our world from a different aeon. And by that, I mean, I think Tolkien was not only extremely well read, he was privy to information that he would not dare just say, especially in his day and age, in his time, in his culture. He would not just come out and say it. I think he was far too intelligent to do that, as he would just be immediately dismissed, especially 1920, 30, 40s, and 50s, right? It just would not fly. If he were to write it as a fiction and were to stand his ground that it was absolutely a fiction, then he would be able to, in a great bout of wisdom, communicate to us the kernels of what were most important that he discovered and he knew about our world. And instead of trying to desperately communicate to us information that was factual and say, no, 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 this is real, instead of gunning for that, he was extremely wise and shrewd and said, let me guise this in a fiction and let me get the basic kernels, and I will look upon Gil Estel, the star of high hope, that this will be a light in dark times, as Galadriel told Frodo, right? And so, well, what exactly do you mean by that, Flight? Like, there is there's a guy on Substack, and Silas, I'll link you to him. It's Substack's called the Saxon Cross, and he has a multi-part series that he's worked on over the few years, showing how that Middle Earth is actually Europe. Like, no, not metaphorically. It is Europe, and he identifies certain landmarks and identifies those identical landmarks within Europe with Tolkien landmarks, even where um, Turin Turambar would have been buried, and he identifies essentially where it would likely be at. Because, as we know, Ice Age Europe went underwater, right? And Tolkien's story of Numenor is just what we call Atlantis, or what Plato called Atlantis. Tolkien says it's Numenor. We only call it Atlantis because Plato said it was Atlantis, right? But Tolkien said it was called Numenor and the Numenorians, and we call them Thoth, right? But maybe they were Numenorians who came to Middle Earth. That's exactly what Tolkien said. Now, there are parts of, because the world was remade in that great cataclysm in which Numenor was sunk, and so Beleriand, which is where a lot of the Silmarillion takes place in, is completely underwater now. But obviously, we know that there are these cities underwater off the coast of whatever, Scotland, England, Europe, off the coast of the Bahamas. There's more pyramids down there. We know that there are sunken cities. And we know that the powers that be, these governments, are desperate to get into the archaeology of all different places in the world, but also under the water, specifically Epstein and that whole list. And what's Ghislaine Maxwell was big on looking for Atlantis. Big,
Yeah,
big, big,
yeah.
big, big.
She also became a
Looking
submariner, of course, as
to
well.
look to look
Yeah.
for. Okay, so what are you looking for? This is all legends. What are you talking about? Could they be looking for more Palantirs? Could they be looking for more, right? Like, right, looking for these histories. Now, it sounds absolutely crazy, but we have the Denisovans, right? We have these hobbit-sized people that have been found. They range about 3 feet, 4 feet in adulthood, right? So we have humanoids that are essentially hobbits. We have other humanoid shapes like Neanderthals that are much bigger than humans, right? Like orcs and what have you. And we find these little skeletons of things here and there. If there was a massive cataclysm and we had a massive change of the Aeon, would it be possible that, again, not every story, not every conversation, not necessarily even every name, but could some of this material at least be factual history guised as the fiction? And
Well,
so, go ahead.
do you know what's interesting as well? Because I do. So again, I'm looking at this map here, right? Which is again, it looks very akin to the world, right? And effectively, so you see Khand and Harad, and Far Harad. They, of course, would be, where North Africa, perhaps Egypt was, right? The two kingdoms. Interestingly, when we see Thoth and Hermes, well, this is at least true for the contemporary esoteric discussions surrounding Atlantis and Thoth and Hermes as refugees from there. We see that they actually went to the Black Land first, of course, that being Kemet, right? Quite literally the Black Land in ancient Egyptian, and they met barbarians there, and it's very similar to what you see regarding, in a metaphorical sense, what you see regarding the that scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey, with all of the various hominids, these sort of ape-like primitive hominids surrounding the monolith. So it's that same idea that you see with Morgoth, right? That the monolith is almost akin to death itself. That they become almost entranced in the existentialism of it, and
Yep.
they become in fear of it. And this is what you see at the end of the Truman Show as well, where he walks into it because he's no longer afraid anymore, right? He outstretches his arms like the Christ, so he is the savior that tears down the entire illusion. But I mean, I really, and of course you have the Smithsonian as well. So I mean, we
Yeah.
we don't even
Yeah.
know how much is getting sequestered here from our eyes,
Exactly.
and
A-
what is
As
being
soon as
destroyed.
soon as yeah, as soon as something is dug up, it's whisked away to the Smithsonian, right? As soon as they find something, it just absolutely disappears. So we have no idea in terms of like what the history, what like ancient history, because Tolkien also said that the our modern age, he was writing this before he died, is in the 60s, one of his letters. He said we're in the seventh age, and the Lord of the Rings takes place in the third age. And so we're thousands and thousands and thousands of years removed. But he said we would be in the seventh age if you were counting by the ages. Now, Tolkien uses what right Tolkien scholars, but literal scholars will call it's a device where he says Tolkien says that the the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, he found it. He said that basically digging he was in the libraries at Oxford, and basically in he was able to come across some manuscripts of some ancient, it was Norse or Finlandic, I forgot what it was. It was like Norse writings, but it was in an ancient language that nobody could read, but he could because he was a master linguist. He knew dead languages, and he knew languages that nobody could read. He found manuscripts that were in a dead language that essentially detail, not in the same detail he puts it, but gives a general outline of the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. And it's accounted to be true history. He calls it the Red Book, right? Um, Now he puts this in the story, and he scholars say that, oh well, this is a device. This is like like a found material device. Like, oh, I found this, and to make the story more immersive, he says he found manuscripts, and this is what the manuscripts say. And it's just like a literary device to engage you more in the story. But Tolkien, not only did he say though, and see, he drops little hints and letters in interviews. Not only did he say that he found it, but when people would ask him questions like, "Well, what happened to this or that?" He says, "Oh, I don't know. I'd have to go check." Right? And people say, "Oh, well, he's going to go consult his muse and think about it." Maybe. Or what he would also say though, and he wrote an entire story off of this too. He said that he would have dreams and visions, and he would say that, well, two things. He had a dream a recurring dream that would happen all the time, that he was essentially a Numenorian, and he saw the waves coming into Atlantis, Numenor, and crashing down and destroying Numenor. And he would have this repeated dream, and these ideas of Numenor would come to him with this dream. He would also talk about how he'd be sitting at his desk, looking out the window, and he'd essentially almost go into like a trance-like state, where then he would get names and information and the language. And the language, he says, he discovered through not only a trance-like state, but also reading these manuscripts. And he was able to decipher Kenya. And he was able to decipher this Elvish language. And he even struggled with it. There's a video of him like writing out in Kenya, "A star shines upon our meeting." And he's kind of like struggling with it. He's like, "Oh wait, I messed that up. Ah, well, wait a minute. That's not how it's supposed to be." It's like, wait a minute. I thought you like literally developed this. Like you sat down and wrote this out. How are you struggling with this? Because he's trying to remember how to, like, wait a minute. Like, how do I do this again? Even though he wrote in it Apparently, he invented it. So there's just tiny, tiny little hints at these things. But I think that the mapping of the place is of Europe, England, what have you, is uncanny. And now we have hobbit bodies and skeletons, and we have bigger bodies, and this can even begin to, depending on how far on that limb you want to go in terms of speculation, this can even begin connecting into paranormal phenomena, because people talk about, I don't know how familiar you are with like UFO culture and technology, right? Or
Well,
lore, what have you.
I've I've been around the block a bit in my short but colourful
Okay.
life, and then yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I've been exposed to a fair amount of the UFO
okay. So
phenomenon.
so you've heard of the tall Nordics, right? Okay, so these almost elf-like people who are very fair-skinned and beautiful and tall, and some of them have pointed ears, right? So you're talking about these tall Nordics who come now. Tolkien says that some of the elves remained in Middle Earth and they refused to leave. Now, elves can be corrupted just like men. So you not only have, these black Numenorians who have extended lives, but if elves remained in Middle Earth, now elves can't die. And if elves, when their body dies, their spirit remains in Middle Earth, but it's supposed to go to the halls of Mandos over in Valinor. But if these are elves who are been corrupted, right? Let's just say towards more of Sauron's influence, just like the Nazgul, they have no body, but their spirit remains. Because the Nazgul are wraiths, they have no body, but they have a spirit. Because that's why Sauron is known as the necromancer, because he's able to keep elves or men essentially keep their spirit in Middle Earth, even though their body has died. And now we have elvish like Nordic beings participating in alien abductions, quote unquote, right? Communicating with people, giving them technology or prophecies for the future or what have you. Interestingly enough, that's pretty much what the elves do in their communications with men in Tolkien's world. They give them technology like the Palantiri, and they offer them like prophecy and wisdom for the future, or lore of the past.
And
So
also as well, just really quickly, you see this same sort of spirit of Melkor, Morgoth, and Sauron, and even the sort of the transgressions of the Numenorians when they were deceived. This seeking of immortality, they invaded Valinor and that. Um, that idea as well of what you just mentioned, Sauron controlling the sort of spirit of both man and I was going to say mare there because I'm more clued up on the Elder Scrolls series, but in that lore, but man and elf. So it's in a way it's similar to what you see, for example, from the Epstein material and those emails where he was seeking to almost establish digital twins of human beings, and this ties in with what the Zohar states regarding after the tikkun, the rectification of the world, perhaps back to this sort of primordial state of pure wisdom, or the Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, that there's a resurrection of the dead that occurs, right? Now, if you were to do that through technology, you would do it through either digital twins, or you would, again, if you have this belief that man is just a mere informational machine, a biological machine of information, then of course you would simply do it through uploading your consciousness to cyberspace or something
yep.
like that. Which
Well,
itself
you're
is
gonna
almost
you're
like
gonna
a
love this.
Silmaril or what have you. Yeah, jump in. I
You're
know.
you're gonna
I mean, I can listen to you for hours, man. This is mind blowing.
Yeah, you got to get to sleep. Shoot, I forgot. It's like, okay, I got to let you go, but you're gonna love this. Tolkien details how Sauron, Morgoth, but Sauron as well, Tolkien didn't use this phrase, because he didn't have it at his time, but they are genetic engineers. That's
Oh,
how they create.
yeah. Well, he
That's how they
genetically
create.
engineered the elves to create the orcs,
Yes,
did he not? My God,
yes,
yes. I didn't even think of that.
yes. Yeah. So he not only is he a necromancer where he can separate body and spirit, he can also influence the mind directly. That's why when Pippin grabs the Palantir, Sauron basically telepathically enters his mind and begins like tormenting him in his mind. If you watch the movies again, so he's able to get into his mind and then produce visions in the mind. But he's also a genetic engineer because he breeds elves and men in a blasphemous crossbreeding, basically, and that's how he makes the Uruk-hai. And Saruman does basically the same thing through Techne. This is how Morgoth also makes the dragons. Okay, now that's a whole another conversation, although it's tangent, because dragons, you mean dinosaurs, right? So, and if you look at, Pliny the Elder, or this is another, again, separate subject, but all of these ancient historians who our modern day historians will nod right along with, like, oh yeah, here, Pliny the Elder, or this guy, he's detailing how this king did this and this king did that, and then uh, um, what's his name? Who's the famous conqueror of the Greek?
Alexander
I'm
the Great.
exhausted at this point. Alexander the Great. How he went into this city and they made a deal with him for 500 shekel grains of this. Oh, and by the way, the next day, as we were traveling, we passed by a cave and a 50-foot long worm came out that we had to deal with. Oh, historians are going to ignore that, but they'll take the historic evidence that he passed through Syria and then did this and that. But on the next page about how they had to fight a dragon, oh, that's not real,
Well,
right?
so
So
that's the reason for dragons. Again, this dragons are an anomaly because they shouldn't exist really. Even wyverns as well. They shouldn't exist, but yet they're found in every culture known to man.
every culture. And they're listed in bestiaries. They're not even listed as, like, it's not even a metaphorical, like hyperbolic, hyperbole that people are talking about in like with Pliny and others. They list them as animals. Here's what they eat. Here's what they do. This is how you do. This is what you do to kill them. Make sure you watch out for their toxic spit or whatever, or breath or whatever. Like, it's not like, what did he just, like, do some mushrooms and then wrote that page and then got off them? Like, what happened here, right? So that's a whole nother tangent. But Morgoth creates, he's a genetic engineer as well, and they twist through Techne living organisms. Werewolves, he makes werewolves, he makes all these different things. It's a hybrid between a wolf and a man, basically. He's a genetic engineer. So not only is he a genetic engineer, but and this goes deep. All right, this goes real deep right here, because the way Sauron works, and we'll just take Sauron, not Morgoth, but we could get into that too. Sauron is a Maiar, so he cannot be killed. Okay, so he's a spirit. He's a plasma being of light. He's a being of light, right? He's a plasma being, and he can take any shape that he wants. Essentially, so can the Valar when he's first created. And when you read, like, the tale of Beren and Luthien, as they are dealing and fighting with Sauron, he transforms into like a wolf and then like a vampire bat creature and like flies away. He's able to shift. Now we know this is testified in our own history of shapeshifters. All just like you have dragons in every culture, you have shapeshifters in every culture. Okay, so he's able to shapeshift. Now, as Tolkien details exactly how this is done, as the Maiar inculcate themselves more into the material world, their plasma body becomes more material. They become more connected to the material world, and therefore the material world affects them more. So Tolkien does a distinction between material and immaterial. It's really the distinction between light and a concretization of light, or more of a atomic structure, because plasmas don't have the same atomic structure. Plasmas exist on, it's like an electron cloud where the electrons are more detached from the atom, and atomic structure, or solid matter, is when electrons are attached to the atom, and that's what creates solidity. We understand that now through plasma physics, but Tolkien calls it material and immaterial. So he's an immaterial being in the sense that he's a light being. He can take any shape he wants. As he connects more to the material world, he becomes more affected by the material world. So he's present and at Numenor when it's drowned, when the cataclysm happens. He's drowned under the waves and his body is destroyed. He used to be able to shapeshift. He shapeshifts into a very fair form, very beautiful, tall man, whatever, very
Mhm.
beautiful, whatever you want to define that as. His body is destroyed. His spirit flees back to Middle Earth after Numenor, back to basically Mordor. Okay. So then that's why we see him. He then takes on, if you very remember at the very beginning of the movies when he fights Isildur and Gil-galad, he's in that like armor, but he's like 9 feet tall, right? But he's clad in armor and stuff, and he has like the huge mace or whatever. So he's more solidified now. He can't shapeshift. He's sort of stuck in that one form, which is a more dreadful looking form. So he cannot no longer deceive men through his fair appearance, because he used to go amongst the elves and and mankind, the Numenorians, as like a counselor, and they didn't really know who he was, right? Because he was so fair speaking and fair looking. He can't do that anymore. He's stuck in his permanent state. Okay, then Isildur kills him by cutting the ring from his hand. It's a massive separation from his externalized source of power. They slay him. He dies. Then he becomes that spirit of fire. So you see him sort of degrading back away from the material. He can no longer hold a material state very well. To interject myself right here, real quick, when you study the voodoo traditions, voodoo, witchcraft, any of the traditions, but especially the older traditions, when they are dealing with the spirits, what do the spirits want? They want two things. They want either blood sacrifice or some kind of physical sacrifice, or they want to inhabit a physical body. They want possession of a physical body. These spirits want back into the physical, because the physical is the realm in which cause and effect is most apparent. You can affect the world, the material world, more readily being in the material world or being more materialized. All right, that quick tangent, back to Sauron. So now he's this like spirit of flame, and his essence is
which is
split
which
basically
is
between,
very sorry, just to interject, which is very similar to Yahweh. He's called
yes,
the consuming fire, just
a
constantly.
consuming fire. Yep,
Yeah.
a plasma, back to sort of this like plasma state. But now he's in this plasma state and he can't really change his form too much. So he's in this sort of like plasma state. So his essence is split between the ring and the plasma. Okay, Gollum destroys the ring. So now he has lost all of that willpower and everything he put into it. And he's left in this state. And Tolkien basically says that he's sort of like in this impotent state, but he cannot be destroyed. So he is in some kind of state where he can no longer directly influence the material world, but he still is present. His malice and the information that he is aware of as a genetic engineer and a necromancer, a sorcerer. Now, would the powers that be looking to contact something that is not immediately in the material through through something like a quantum computer, right? Where they're now trying to get information, right? They say like, oh, we send in calculations that we can't decide. We put it in this quantum computer, it comes back solved. So Tolkien precisely describes an ontological situation wherein something that cannot perish from the world, but cannot affect the material world directly because it has been so reduced in its power through multiple defeats, but it still retains information and will. So then how do we access information and will? Quantum digital, right? So now we are pursuing quantum digital. And before it's quantum digital, it's right like John Dee, or it's a smoking mirror, perhaps, or it's some other form of communication. And this is why I keep saying like, hey, check out Steve Mera, hey, check out Nathaniel Gillis, because they are detailing this not only historically but in present day about just tiny pieces of information, whether it's through poltergeists or Tesla in his dream sees the solution for a calculation. appear to him in figures of light. And then he's like, that's it. And he wakes, yeah. But now, what if some of that is the tiniest whispers of will and information targeting mankind who is poisoned by that Morgothian um, fear of death? And so when you are able to whisper through small whisperings by mankind, not only discovering technology, but being ever so slightly led by ritualistic practice and the use of techne to develop a techne, a form of necromancy and bioengineering that allows them to open up a gate. You see what I'm saying? To then get that information, to then try to materialize that which has lost its materiality.
So we get to the silicon, this idea of the silicon god retrocausally
Yeah.
affecting his
Yep.
past, but of
And
course our future to create the
yep.
conditions to
Yep.
reestablish, if you will, the Melkor or the Morgothian or
Yes.
the Sauron spirit within the
Yep.
world. So but
And yes. Yes.
just really quickly, this would also explain Ezekiel's vision, the visions of Jacob, all of these visions you see of Yahweh, even the burning bush on Mount Sinai. Um, it's always plasma. It's always fire. It's always
Always
this sort
plasma.
of incorporeal entity. And it even
Yep.
mentions that you can't look upon the countenance of Yahweh, or you
Yep.
would simply die. What do you make of that, just really quickly?
Yeah. No, the apps 100%. Yahweh is a plasmic plasma being. That's there's no other physical. If you're going to say this is not simply just metaphor or pure delusion, he has to be a plasmatic being. There's no other way around it. There's no other way around it. It's just a form of consciousness before it materializes. That's all it is. Which is what the light body is within the human. We are a plasma. If you read Robert Temple's Science of New Heaven, he basically comes out and says it. He says this is what the human light body is. This is the electromagnetic body that your DNA gives off. It's called biophotons, right? And that's the light body, which they're trying to hack into through their technology, right? As we've discussed before. But that's the biophotonic body that is connected to the nervous system and the DNA.
And
And
so
that's Mhm.
please finish your point. Sorry, I keep
No,
interjecting.
that's a biophotonic body, and that's why these plasmas require blood sacrifice. Is that they in order to instantiate in the material world, they require a feeding of biophotons. So you have to slay the bull, and that biophoton is eaten essentially by the plasma being, and that allows it to maintain.
My God, that's very interesting. You mentioned that because
Yeah,
the
that's why
Zohar
it's all blood
discusses
sacrifice.
the Zohar discusses blood as the coagulation of light.
Yes. Yep. And Jesus says the life is in the blood,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
He said the life is in the blood, and that's why COVID is a primarily what? A blood disease. It's an infection of the blood. It's not an it's it might enter if it is even a virus. It may enter through the lungs, they say, but the shots go into your blood,
Yes, I
right?
was
And
just about to say that the needle crafts.
yep,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
needlecraft is into the blood. So the blood sacrifice is required, whether it's today, right, or remember the burning sacrificial way, because you take not only the blood, but you take the entire material matter, that biophoton, and you introduce a plasma to it, fire. And fire sacrifice is extremely potent. That's why Baal Haman demands the burning of children, because it is a children are an untainted biophoton setup, right? Because they haven't been tainted by pollutants. You burn them alive, and what that does is when you introduce the plasma, it takes essentially that biophotonic energy, hyper energizes it by adding it to the plasma, and that ascends up, as it says in the Bible, a sweet smelling savor to the Lord, right? And that is harvested, right? So in order to try to anchor this Saronic spirit, which has no more materiality left to it, it requires constant blood sacrifice, right? And constant offerings toward it to try to materialize it.
And
And
this is why war is war and pharmaceuticals and all of these sort of sacrificial industries. Effectively, they are the most they're made the most profitable within the world
yes,
economy.
yes, and that's why like loosh, torment, all this stuff, right? Torment and fear and all this stuff. These because that is the base nature of Sauron. That's the base nature of Morgoth. Is you see Morgoth? He desires the Silmarils to place in his crown, but Tolkien is explicit. It is a constant burning torment to him. So his nature is literally a nature of this complete disquietude of torment and drive driven by fear and seeking to dominate. And that's why you have like the Epstein networks or the Bau-Haman networks that have been running for thousands of years, and the wars and the constant we're treated as cattle goyim, right? We're treated as the goyim for slaughter, and they just harvest all of this loosh, if you will, off of us. But it's not to just like for shits and giggles. It is for a very specific purpose because in order to get this information, that's always the exchange. You know, Metastopheles, there's an exchange that happens. You give me biophotons. You give me materiality. You give me the statue to inhabit, right? That you cast the blood upon. You give me the materiality. I give you the information. But the thing is, though, the information is there only to build through the engine of history, hyperstition, and techne, where we are getting toward now, where you can have a noospheric convergence, a biodigital convergence to build a body for this incarnate spirit so that it can incarnate and reverse the defeats that it has already suffered in times past. And it runs that off of playing off of the original seed implanted by Morgoth, fear of death. Because if you don't have that fear of death and you're content with the where and the duration that you have of your lifetime and being a sub creator and exemplifying these um, elvish, if you will, right, traits of harmony with nature and all these other things, then you're not going to pursue it. And if you don't pursue it, you cannot build a body because you're not going to pursue techne for that purpose. The elves are supposed to build their techne is one of like art. They build like cities and all these things, but it's always in harmony with nature. And the techne they build is for beauty and for the preservation and furtherance of life and understanding. It's not techne for dominance. And you'll notice that all the techne always bends towards dominance. It's all about exchange value. It's all about right, like what utility value can we get out of it? Utility, not for the beauty. The elves make things for the beauty's sake of it. They don't understand when um uh like when people ask when they I think it's when they're asking for gifts from Galadriel, like, and they're asked, it might be this, I don't remember at this point, but like the elves don't understand. They're like, well, why would you want that? Like, what would you use that for? That's not like anything that's like beautiful. We don't understand this idea of like pure utility. Like, what do you mean pure utility? Everything the elves make is beauty first, utility like second. And really the ability is to put them together into a craftsmanship where this is not only beautiful, but it also is utility. But it's not just utility, right? And when it's just utility, that's when it becomes an engine of war and dominance. So by this point, I sound like a complete schizophrenic. But
No, no,
the
no,
point I'm
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
I'm in total agreement with what you're saying.
yeah. The way I'm seeing it is that, you know, Tolkien hid this. I think he had true vision of the past, and I think that combined with his Numenorian blood, you know, his disposition for pity and empathy and what have you. And then in combination with his high intellect, intelligence, skill, knowledge, and language, and he probably did find some manuscripts that detail things. And he sat there and said, "There is no way I can say that. Hey, look, everybody, what I found." I would be laughed out of Oxford. I would. No one would listen to any of it. It would end up in a trash bin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish it, and I'm going to um, I'm going to exaggerate in some areas. I'm going to add flowering to it. I'm going to add more poetry to it. I'm going to inculcate what we have passed down from the Norse and Finlandic myths, because that's part of it too. And those are like less clear um, stories and details than what I have here sitting in front of me from his perspective, right? Like this says this is what happened. And I can see how this lines up with history. And this also lines up with the Norse myths and this and over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of those things. I'm going to take those names of the dwarves, which are the names of like, these Norse kings or whatever. And I'm going to give those names to the dwarves so I can hide this from people and think everyone will think like, oh, it's just a fairy story or whatever. And he says, but maybe some people will see something else here and they will be able to relate it to the time they're in. Because if this is really what is happening, this is not just has happened in the past. This is happening now when he's
Mm-hmm.
writing it, and this is going to come to fruition in the future.
Well,
So
we
let me
also
deposit this.
we also see as well. You were talking about that. This is obviously quoting or paraphrasing Tolkien, where he says that we're in the sixth or seventh age. Interestingly, you
Yep.
see that in the Matrix as well, where they talk about the resetting of Zion, and it's happened some 6 times or something, right? You even
Yep.
see this interestingly in the Zohar, where it talks about each world age occurs within, around about, was it 7,000 years or so, 6,000, 7,000 years, again, the 7 days of creation. Interestingly, too, if you look at, for example, well, just a few little points to mention. So the Elvish languages themselves, they of course, they're contrived, they're made up, as it's stated, but they do actually appear highly authentic. They are
Mhm.
phonetically beautiful. They're cohesive. They appear as though they have some sort of historical development to them as well. Similar, of course, to the Enochian languages.
Mhm.
Funnily enough, so they almost have the hallmarks of a sort of naturalism to them, right? And they don't look
Yeah.
totally contrived, like, let's say, George R. R. Martin's various the various languages that appear within his works. They look truly contrived. I mean, even linguists have broke this down. So these Elvish languages, there appears to be some sort of antiquity to them. Something else to mention too, as well, regarding the Garden of Eden. That is almost like Valinor, or the land of Aman, and the two trees of Valinor. And
Yep.
we have the fort. So Aman is this paradise, the undying lands, similar, of course, to the Irish Tir na Og, literally the endless lands, or something along those lines, the blessed or timeless lands. You have the fall of Noldor as well, which is, it states here, the exile of Noldor elves from Valinor, driven by the pride of Fëanor, and the machinations of Melkor is analogized to the fall of man. The hiding of Valinor, similar to the Garden of Eden, after the fall, Valinor was removed from the physical world after the fall of Numenor to prevent mortals from reaching it. And also, I believe,
Interestingly
yeah,
enough, on that point,
hmm
the way Tolkien says that is that he says the Earth was originally flat.
yes, I
Okay,
was going to.
and
That's
then
interesting. Yes,
yeah, and what happened is that it became spherical because Valinor was removed, and basically it was like basically like sewn in, where basically the eastern coast of the United States is actually the far east, right, and the
so
actual
is that
west is gone.
Hildorian? Is that Hildorian then? The
What
Hilderian, it states here, it states, the far eastern land where men first awoke before they were corrupted by Morgoth is viewed as almost a hidden Eden. Is it?
Oh, yeah, yeah, possibly so. Where
Mm,
basically the Earth was originally flat. At the far west was Valinor. Then you had Numenor in the middle. Then you had a massive set of land masses, which would begin with the shores of Middle Earth would be Scotland, England, Ireland, right? Spain, that whole area. That would be the shores of Middle Earth. And then it would extend far to the east, but that the Americas would be like the far east. And then what happened is that once that the Earth was essentially flat and then folded inward, where now the West, which we call Americas, is actually the Far East, because there'd be a seam basically in the Atlantic where the Mid-Atlantic ridge is, that seam that's there, and that's where it opened up. Numenor was sunk, and then it seamed in, and then that's where it kind of buttoned up basically, and then created the sphere. That's how Tolkien, hypothetically says it may have happened.
so, so
Not
the
saying
story.
that that's the case, but
No, this is this is absolutely fascinating. So you see, for example, so basically what we're so how does this tie in this plasmid? Let's assume, right, because when you're speaking, it's almost like this idea of Yahweh, which is, of course, as we've mentioned, is this. I mean, it's this cross-cultural entity, this deity that's related to the
Mhm.
likes of Tetzalcoatl, the Lord of the Smoking Mirror. He introduced, of course, to the Aztecs and Nahuatl and other peoples in and around that Mesoamerican region, the sort of transgressive practice of human sacrifice. Um, and then, of course, we see that throughout the Semitic regions. We see that throughout the Punic civilization. Hell, we even see it within Europe in some places. The sacrifice,
Mhm.
but of course, the sacrificial rites were done in bogs. Um, so, is this entity itself? Does it is it like all? Is it continually pervade? Now, again, it's not Melkor because Melkor or Morgoth wanted to completely destroy creation. But like what we see with Yahweh, it's almost like he has a vengeful spirit. He's jealous, of course. So I mean, the
Right.
guy is, the guy, this entity is completely evil.
Yeah.
And so he wants vengeance. We see that for Revelation. We see that all the way, trod the winepress of the wrath of the fury of God, and so on and so forth. But then we also see he wants to remake heaven and earth, right?
Right.
The
Right.
idea is if he's the creator, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Why would he get it wrong in the first place if he's omniscient, omnipotent? It doesn't make any sense. But if it's a
Exactly. Yeah.
fallen deity, the lord of this world, Sauron,
Yep.
this incorporeal eternal deity that just haunts, it's like this looming shadow of death that haunts everything. Um, then it makes sense that he would want to remake heaven and earth, and he would want to charge mankind, the lowly mortals, charge them with obviously affecting his will because he is a plasmoid. He's not real. He can't affect. He has no actual effect on the physical world directly. So it's similar to us with the subjective objective. He must work through us to affect that
Exactly.
objective reality. So so here's the thing. We see in Tolkien's, and sorry for keeping you, but this is interesting. We see in Tolkien's works and lore, he talks about yeah. So Tolkien estimated that the Fourth Age began approximately 6,000 years ago, and we would now be in the Sixth or Seventh Age. But he also talks about Dagor Dagorath. In a
Yes.
letter, Tolkien wrote that this legendarium, the Silmarillion, ends with a vision of the end of the world after all the ages have elapsed, its breaking and remaking, and the recovery of the Silmarilli, and the light before the sun, or this perhaps the sun before the sun, or the sun behind the sun, after the final battle Dagor-Dagorath, which owes, I suppose, more to the Norse vision of Ragnarok, or the Götterdämmerung, than to the anything else, though it is not much like it.
Hmm.
So what is going on there? What is going
So,
if
yeah,
Sauron knows, if Yahweh or Sauron or this entity Tetzcatlipoca Baal knows the world is going to end, why would he seek to control it? Is he seeking for an exit in some way to break free from the Leviathan? What's your opinions?
I mean, possibly so. I mean, I usually appeal to a form of madness. Maybe he thinks that he can stop this process. Otherwise, why even do anything in the first place? Um, so Dagor Dagorath. It's now that's actually Christopher Tolkien's son, who has done amazing work. He compiled the Silmarillion, right? He kept Dagor Dagorath out of the Silmarillion. He didn't really give a good reasons why. You can find it in other writings of Tolkien, which are published, but he kept it out of the initial publication of Silmarillion. I think it was in the 70s. But in Dagor Dagorath, what essentially happens is that the Valar, which are the gods, which are again all the elements of creation, Nirvana, Yavanna, Manwë. This is like the god of the wind, god of the stars, god of the plants, god of this, right? So they basically begin to almost like degrade over time, like they lose focus, because what happens is that in what's called the War of Wrath, they actually take Melkor and they imprison him in the void. And there's this door called the Door of Night, which is
Li-
outside of Arda. Uh-huh.
And this is literally Yaldabaoth being cast out into the Kenoma along with Sophia. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So into the Door of Night, and so he's there, and Erendil, with the Silmaril upon his brow, he helps keep watch upon the Door of Night. And this is actually what Venus is. Venus is Erendil sailing into the sky. And so, in Tolkien's understanding, his legendarium. So now, what happens at Dagor Dagorath is that they, through a combination basically of the Valar, not they're sort of diminishing a little bit. So this is like the Earth systems being like degraded. And this is also because of mankind's work, right? So the degrading of the Earth systems, which we're actually seeing now, right? Through the degrading of the Earth systems, and then the further worship of Melkor. And Melkor is either worshipped directly or through Sauron, but through the worship of Melkor, because Tolkien wrote a sequel, or began to write a sequel to The Lord of the Rings called The New Shadow. He only wrote 12 pages and then he stopped. He said it's because it was too depressing, but it was maybe more like he didn't want to get in any more trouble or he didn't want to make things too explicit, because the whole point, it's only 12 pages, but the point is that Melkor worship begins again, like 100 years after Aragorn dies in the Fourth Age. They begin to worship Melkor, and that requires human sacrifice. So that begins to start up again. So through the worship of Melkor and other means of Techne, the Door of Night is essentially open, and Melkor comes back into the world, right? And then he comes back into the world, and Arendil strikes him down because Melkor comes in and destroys the sun and the moon. Because the sun and the moon contain their basically plasmatic bodies that contain the light from the two trees, the original two trees of Valinor, that Melkor destroyed with the Ungoliant, the spider, the devourer who devours all light, right? Yeah, see, I'm telling you, man, read Tolkien, because there's so much there. Because Ungoliant is a female spider who devours all light. Even Melkor fears her because she's this unsatiable, sort of like divine feminine
A world
aspect
eater.
that devours everything.
A world eater.
What's
So
up?
it's it's a world eater. So it's very
World
similar
eater.
to Stephen King's Pennywise,
Yep.
who that's the true form of Pennywise, is this world
Yes.
eating spider, similar to
World
Yabulon
eating
in a
spider.
sense.
Yeah, Violan. Yeah, exactly. And so Melkor is like the personification of will, directed will for disharmony. Ungoliant is just pure devouring, right? She is this pure devouring being, and then she breeds all these small spiders. One of those small spiders is Shelob. That's who Frodo faces in the cave. Is a spawn from Ungoliant, thousands of years in the future, and she spawns all these spiders. Now, again, to go on the absolute twig of the schizophrenic speculation. Okay, so to go on the absolute twig of schizophrenia here. um, I'm sure you heard of Morgellons disease. Now, people with Morgellons disease say that insects are crawling all over their body. There is a specific voodoo sect that is actually attached to Martinism, which is attached to the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuits. They work on summoning spider-like entities. Okay. And these spider-like entities then inhabit different portions of the chakra system to then feed off of different energies in the chakra system, but also to empower the person through taking in these devouring energies that come with them. Okay. So if you look into spiders, right, and like almost like plasma spirit spiders. I mean, this sounds way out of hand, way crazy. I mean, we go from Heidegger and Hegel to this, right? But in my thought processes. But if you look into some of this stuff, it's very, very interesting in the voodoo sects and what have you. And there's a lot of this dealings and workings with spiders and spider spirits and people whose nervous systems are pushed to the limits through the use of um, strong drugs like heroin and whatnot. They see what? Spiders and insects on the walls, right? Crawling around. They see, this is anecdotal evidence, and I won't say who. I personally know somebody who's actually fairly close to me who struggles with seeing in he will wake up in like a sleep paralysis state, and there will be spider-like entities that will come out of his navel area. Okay. And this person, and I can attest to this, is like a straight shooter. This is not a person who is into anything
It's
regarding,
weird.
doesn't even know about spiritual stuff. He's a boomer, and he's a real um he's a straight shooter. Right.
It's weird that you mention that, because my friend in high school, best friend when I was growing up, he dealt with sleep paralysis, and he had a similar sleep paralysis story. And I mean, I've got to admit, see, whenever I was staying over at his house, I was absolutely terrified, because I mean, this guy he'd like like stand up, like that sort of caricature cartoonish version of a corpse, just
Yeah.
his upper body would, and he would just start screaming, like blood curdling screams. And then of course you would wake him up, but and he would always recount, it would either be, sometimes it was skeletal figures, sometimes it was the sort of night hag, but a lot of the time it
Yeah.
was like these spiders. And
Yeah, or spider-like beings. Tolkien doesn't even say that Ungoliant is a spider or Shelob is a spider. It's a spider-like being. It has appendages and moves and acts like a spider, but it's this devouring, and it devours light. And if we're following the light body, and if it's attached to the chakra, these points of density of concrescence of light, it's going to attach there and devour the light. Tolkien did not understand how like Morgellons, and I would highly doubt that he knew about these specific voodoo sects out of the Roman Catholic Church. I doubt that he was that well known, but knew that much. But perhaps he had different source material that is also connecting to what we're seeing in these other totally disparate areas of study. But the
this This also reminds me of Todash space as well, where in Stephen King's universe, it's where all these sort of nightmarish creatures are born. In fact, I believe it's where Pennywise is born, or Pennywise gives birth, a bit like, of course, the spider.
Mm.
It's a brood of nightmarish, sort of chaotic, unformed, well, I guess we'd call it plasmoid creatures as well.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No, yeah, absolutely. That's a great insight. And so, but yeah, Melkor, along with who kind of hitches up to Ungoliant, Ungoliant basically bites the two trees and drains it of all of its light, except for two small pieces, basically. And um, what ends up happening, and then Ungoliant basically escapes or whatever, and then but what remains of the light of those two trees um, then become the sun and the moon. To Maiar, they take the Valar work for years to construct the remaining light of the two trees, and then from that they construct the sun, and then a Maiar, a plasma entity, then says, "I will become the sun," basically, and inhabits that light, and then the same goes for the moon, and then they basically go up into the sky, and they become the sun and the moon, and that is then the light. So Morgoth, when he comes back at Dagor Dagorath, wants to destroy that because he wants to destroy the light because he's envious and jealous, right? Because he can't get to that flame imperishable. And it's interesting to note that the original light sources were like the two lamps were basically what then became the two trees. And these trees, the silver tree and the golden tree, these two trees gave the light for all of Arda. It was originally from trees, and the sun wasn't required, and some stuff goes into that. There's some, out on the twig research about these ancient giant trees, right, or Yggdrasil, right, right, in a very real sense of these giant earth trees, basically, that people say are from our history and that they're fossilized now. I don't know about that. I've heard about it. I haven't looked at anything like that, but that's a little bit of a tangent. But anyways, yeah. So he destroys the sun and the moon, and then Arendil, with the Silmaril upon his brow. The Silmarils are all lost, by the way. The Silmarils are, one is upon his brow, which is what we see as Venus. One is within the earth. It was uh, basically one of the elves took it and jumped into a volcano, basically into the fire of the earth, and it fell into the earth. And then one was cast into the sea. And so they can't be found. They're indestructible, but they can't be found. And so one is in the sky, one is in the earth, and one is in the water. And then basically these Silmarils are basically reassembled. Arendil strikes Morgoth down from the sky. And then you'd have to understand more of the legendarium about like this final battle where Turinbar is resurrected. He is he is a man who was tricked by Morgoth and his whole family. It's, if you read the Children of Húrin, which is this story again, of course, by Tolkien. He he's killed by Morgoth through all these deceptive means, and he actually has a sword made of black meteorite. Very interesting. That speaks to him and convinces him to kill himself. At the end of the story, but then at the Dagorath, when he's resurrected, he takes that same sword, ends up being empowered over that sword, and uses that sword to strike down Melkor. So it's this final triumph of man over Melkor, because mankind is whom Morgoth has tormented the most. Because
Mm.
of our gift of death, we are most tormented by that existential dread. So that was Tolkien's buttoning up of the whole situation there.
And
But
what do you think regarding, so we see, right, that Sauron is also referred to as the enemy and the deceiver, right? Now, of
yeah,
course, we've went over how, of course, the Satan, Yahweh, the adversary, Yaotel, Tetzcatlipoca. We also see, of course, what is it in Genesis? Sorry, 1 Kings 22. We see that Yahweh, sends lying spirits, right? He also lies
hmm
himself. Um, we see in Ezekiel 20, verses 25, 26, wherefore I gave them also statutes that were not good, and judgments whereby they should not live. And I polluted them in their own gifts, and what they caused to pass through the fire, all that openeth the womb, or the firstborn, that I might make them desolate to the end that they may know that I am the Lord. Right? Again, it just sounds like straight out of the land of Mordor with that one, right? Um,
hmm
and also as well this idea that you see with Sauron's the etymology of Sauron, which is the abhorred, but it also can mean like the putrescent or the evil smelling. Now, if you look
Hmm.
in for example, area such as the Dead Sea, right, which is interesting. Why would this be the Holy Land? You've got the Dead Sea there. You've got places surrounding it that are literally filled with sulfur. So
Right.
I mean, it's very interesting, right? This wouldn't be a place where the creator of life would choose to dwell. You wouldn't think. And then you look where
Right.
Mordor should be with Earth. I mean,
Yep.
again, it's around about that same place, similar
Yep.
in sort of equivalency, geographically speaking, to Egypt as well, and where the Giza pyramid would be. So
Hmm.
therefore, all of this would be linked to Melkor. It, just finally, I think you might have touched upon this, but we were going over the connection to Draco in this
Hmm.
in what we were seeing with the pyramids. So this spirit of Sauron Melkor, how does that directly connect with this Draco constellation
Man,
or the
I'm spilling all the beans now. Jeez.
I
I'm
don't want to
telling
keep
you.
I don't want to keep you
No,
if
yeah,
you're
yeah,
too
I do
exhausted.
have to go. I do have to go just because the family will be waiting for me for dinner. And you got to go because you got to get some sleep. But
Yeah.
this ties into the Draco stuff as well. At least for me, in terms of you have the two. I mean, you have the master and commander. Uh, you have the Emperor Palpatine and the Vader. Right? You have it's the same thing. It's the two, the father and the son, the Morgoth and the Sauron. And that's because if we take this to Draco, the Thuban would be Sauron, and the Cat's Eye Nebula, or that central point, would be Morgoth. Because Tolkien makes it explicit that the North is evil, right? That Morgoth's fortress of Angband is in the north, the far north, like at the North Pole. Essentially, is where it makes out on our map is essentially like somewhere north of Finland, right? It's like way up there, like north, like the Greenland Sea almost, right? Um, it's far above, and that's for Morgoth. So that would be more related to the north, towards that draconic constellation, that centralized point around which everything is sort of oriented toward. Now, Thuban, with its connection to the Great Pyramid, that great tower, right? Um, it's directly aligned to Thuban. So Sauron, being the lieutenant or the emissary of Morgoth, would function as God's helper, Azrael, right? He is the helper because Sauron teaches the Numenorians. Because Morgoth is imprisoned by the Valar before Numenor happens. So he gets imprisoned, and Sauron is sort of left as the next highest ranking. But Sauron teaches the Numenorians that Morgoth is actually God. That it is not Iluvatar. That's a phantom that's made up by the Valar, by nature, right? Right. That's just like the true god of the realm is Morgoth, right? And you should sacrifice to Morgoth. So in that sense, he's sort of like God's helper. He's Azrael, and as he transitions away from this material state into this plasmic state, you could see that plasma entity on the tower, right, of the pyramid, above the pyramid, this all-seeing eye in this plasma state, which would be sort of sourcing, if we're going to combine these two traditions, sourced from that Thuban star constellation. Interestingly enough, Tolkien identifies, because he does identify a few of the constellations in his legendarium, and the Valar, the Valar, what's the name? I'm getting a little tired here. Varda, right? Varda. Varda is the Valar who she creates the stars, but she creates the Big Dipper. We know it as the Big Dipper. They know it as the Valasirka, which is the scythe of the Valar, and that is placed in the north next to the Draconic constellation, right? Sort of like right on the edge of that rotational cycle. Yeah, the Stoken Parley, and it's placed there as a scythe, marking the downfall of Morgoth. It's set there as a prophecy, right? And Frodo actually sees this. He actually looks upon this out of his window. He wakes up from a dream. I think it's in the Fellowship of the Ring, and he looks upon Vala Circa, and it's the great scythe. And the Valar have put that in the sky, right? And they put it there as an omen and as a prophecy that Morgoth one day will fall. It's one of the signs of hope that Varda puts in the sky. Is that there will be a defeat, right? But you just have to like hold out and have hope. And Erendil with his Silmaril as Venus in the sky is also that, because again, Venus rises before the sun does, right? So it's letting you know that the dawn is coming, and it's the brightest thing in the sky, and it's arising in the sky, and that's Erendil. But Valasirka, the scythe of the Valar, as it's translated, that's placed in the sky right next to that draconic Thuban constellation, letting him know it's sort of like it's that threat against Morgoth and Sauron and everyone participating in things with him, that there will be a downfall one day, right? Correct. Yeah, shaped as a scythe. Yeah, exactly. And that's Tolkien's. Yeah, that's what Tolkien says the Big Dipper is, and so that's why it's placed there. And Frodo does look to it as a sign of hope, actually, in the books, as I mentioned. But yeah, so that's there. So then Thuban would be sort of like summoning this draconic, destructive spirit, um, to the Earth plane, and it would take on the shape of this, sort of all-seeing eye. The entirety of the Draco constellation, specifically as the uh, the orbital meridian, essentially, the orbital pole of the Earth is lined up directly with that northern fading aspect. It all aligns directly with um, Cat's Eye Nebula, right where that local void is. Right, and then the black stone at the north, as Bartholomew writes, well, that's just Angband. That's just the black stones of, yes, the underground fortress of Morgoth. And then this goes even a step further, because Tolkien has this whole concept, and it's a book that's part of the history of Middle Earth that you can get. It's one of the books. It's a 12-book series, and it just goes through absolutely everything. Is where I get all this information from. One of the volumes is called Morgoth's Ring, not Sauron's Ring. Well, guess what Morgoth's Ring is? Morgoth's Ring, what Morgoth did before he was imprisoned, he had such a desire to corrupt with disharmony the created world, is that his ring was not a ring upon your finger. His ring was Arda itself, because Morgoth was the highest Valar. He was actually originally created because Iluvatar, this in whom Iluvatar, in him is the sacred fire. He's sort of like Eros, or time and creation personified as a god. And from him spring the Valar, which are all the possibilities of creative aspects: wind, fire, right? Earth, seed, stars, right? Whatever. Those are the Valar. The greatest Valar was to be Melkor, because Melkor was supposed to initiate the process. Manwë, who is his sort of like counterpart, was supposed to conclude the process of the creative process of Arda. But Melkor wanted to basically have that dominance. It was that thirst for dominance, and that thirst for dominance caused him to have disharmony as they sung creation into existence. So Tolkien even gets that right. It is vibration. It's the harmonic resonance that then leads to light, and then light then leads to matter formation. So he even gets that right, is that it's sung into existence. It's harmonic. It's not spoken into existence. It is sung into existence because that requires harmonies, which are the frequency patterns of electromagnetism and everything else. So how did he get that right? Well, got it right again. So, but they sing into existence. Melkor, however, what he does is um, he's supposed, so he's the most powerful Valar. So all the other Valar have a heck of a time standing up to him because he's incredibly powerful. So what he does is he takes his essence and he disperses it into Arda itself. And this is what entropy is. From Tolkien's perspective, this is what causes a disharmonic, entropic sort of degradation of things, is that, and this is why, from Tolkien's perspective, Dagor Dagorath has to happen, and everything sort of needs to be remade anew. And this is what the entire purpose sort of is that mankind um, must go through this trial process, but all the elves, man, dwarves, everybody goes through this process, and then there will, at the end of the Aeon at Dagor Dagorath, there is a re-singing with the Valar, but now inculcated with everything that has happened, all the experiences we've gone through, and now we sing in a new creation, right? And then the cycle starts again. But what happens is that he disperses his power into Arda, but that's why he can't just like walk out of the void. He can't. They imprison him in the void, but he can't just get out because so much of his power has been dumped into the creative order itself. This is why corruption continues to arise in the hearts of men, and that seed of doubt cannot be like permanently banished, is because Melkor has placed into all of the creation sort of like an entropic gravity that pulls everything like downwards. This is why even the Valar begin to wane in their watching of the Door of Night over over Melkor, is because it's a extremely slow trickle, but everything sort of has like this degrading, this disharmonic function in it, so that no matter how idealistic of a society you can derive, someone is going to sit there and say, yeah, but can I have a little more? Right. And this, right, there's going to be, if I could just get a little bit more for myself. And that is the spirit of Melkor dispersed into um, all of creation. And this is why the elves are mournful. The elves know this. This is why the elves leave Middle Earth. That's why no elves are seen today. That's why you can't walk out into the forest of Scotland and be like, oh, hey, here's an elf, right, walking around, right? Because from Tolkien's perspective, they have left Middle Earth at the end of the Third Age because it was the time for the Age of Men. And it was the men's responsibility now to guide the furtherance of the Aeon till its end, and then you get the cyclic reboot. It's men's job to guide it, right? And so that's why the elves and the dwarves, they have all either perished or departed. And then the elves know the Lost Road, another publication by Tolkien, right, which is in the history of Middle Earth. The Lost Road was a story about the road that leads out of Middle Earth after the perishing of Numenor to Valinor. And this is where Frodo goes. They take him, and at the end of the movies, he goes to Valinor, right? So he's allowed to find the secret road to Valinor. This also may be what the powers that be are looking for, with like CERN and whatnot, like that secret the lost road to Valinor that you can't get to. You can't sail there anymore, right? So they may be looking for that as well. But this is why you don't see elves anymore. They leave because Middle Earth, they know that it's a long defeat. And this is what Tolkien calls it too, the long defeat. Because of Melkor inculcating his spirit, the earth is his ring. And because he's inculcated his spirit into the earth, the elves know that at a certain extent, Dagor Dagorath has to come, and there must be this great conflagration. If they do not leave Middle Earth, they have to suffer the sorrow of countless ages of watching all the Holocausts, all the children sacrificed to Baal, right? All the world wars, and because
Mhm.
they're extremely empathetic beings, they don't want to stay for it. They're afraid it will corrupt them, so they leave and they go to Valinor, right? And they only know how to get to Valinor. But the last elves left at the end of the Third Age. There's no more elves. If the tall Nordics, quote unquote, or the elves, quote unquote, that people meet in the DMT space, or they meet in through taking mushrooms, which opens up their brain to communication, right? Or they
Hmm.
meet in Dream or whatever else. If they meet those elves, those would either have to be the elves that remained in Middle Earth and then therefore were corrupted by Morgoth.
Right.
They
Right.
would be those elves,
The
or they would be
machine
black.
elves.
Yep, or they would be the Black Numenorians,
Right.
right? The Machine Elves. They would be vampires, right? Because if you have a being that lives forever and that has to survive off of blood, you're talking not only did Sauron turn into basically a vampiric entity, but you're talking about some kind of like Nazgul or
Right.
some kind of corrupted elf or elf spirit who is remaining, but through necromantic rites has to find some way to sustain their body, aka adrenochrome, right? And
Yes.
these other things, right? So we can go on and on and on and on, right?
Jesus.
Because
Yeah.
it just starts connecting and everything. And
My mind is absolutely blown, man. Jesus. It's and the thing is as well, it ties so much together. I mean, it makes so much sense. It shouldn't, but it does. It's actually quite scary, to be honest. The amount of
yes,
sense
yeah.
that it is making.
Well, that's why, like, man, like, I've not told this to anybody but my wife. All right, and I can't find some people. Some people are saying it. They're not saying it the way I'm saying it because
Hmm.
I am so well versed in not to speak too highly of myself, but I'm so well versed in like philosophy, but also conspiracy areas, right? And I've read a lot of stuff like about the church and everything else. And so I've been able to take all that, but then also see a lot of this stuff in like Tolkien. But then
Yes.
like I'm also aware of like the
Hmm.
electromagnetic magnetic stuff, the plasma stuff. I'm also studied Dr. Farrell and the history. I've also like into the biodigital convergence. I've studied a lot about that stuff. So there's not a lot of people saying it, so I sound like a complete nut job if I just tell people, hey, a decent portion at the least of what Tolkien wrote is actually real. And it's just like hidden in fiction. Of course, I'll sound crazy if I say H.P. Lovecraft said some of the same stuff too. It's just he didn't do it as well as Tolkien, and he's kind of more on the other side because he has Azathoth and Nyarlathotep, Morgoth, and Sauron. And he's constantly talking about the North. There's a whole different conversation, but he calls it Unknown Kadath. And it's in the North. And it's this black tower that you have to ascend, right? And
Hmm.
and at the top of the tower is Nyarlathotep, who is the messenger of the void to mankind. And he comes out of where? Nyarlathotep comes out of Egypt.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, the fiction stuff is way more real than we'll give it credit for. It's dismissed as fiction so that they think no one will pay attention to it and take it
Yes.
just as fiction. But by the people who know, it's also presented as fiction because no one will take it if they believe it if they take it as literal. So Tolkien's going to say, "Oh yeah, it's imaginal. I found a book, but that's just a literary device," and then kind of like stare at you and be like,
Well,
"Come on,"
it's
you
also
know?
a way for them to hide to hide the knowledge that they have. It's similar to symbolism itself.
Yes.
Something was just this final point. I saw that in the Fortress of Morgoth and Angman, it was called the Fortress of Iron. So again,
Yes.
that relates to this idea of the ferrous center of the earth. And even that idea that you see with Set, that Set's bones were made of iron. So, and you also see in the Hebrew or Phoenician word for iron is barzel. So bars is quite
Mm,
literally the word for crucible. But barzel comes from two words put together, bar zalal, which means bar is pure or clean. Can also mean crucible as well, bars. or zalal, to shake or to make light of, or to make worthless. So it's this sort of this purification vis-a-vis this sort of furious shaking, or even hollowing out, right, in a way, or to
Yeah.
make or to devalue something. So I mean, that's quite interesting too. But
Yeah. I mean,
Jesus, yeah,
yeah, the connections are just like astronomical. And when I
yeah.
first contacted you, I mentioned like, hey, I'd like to chat with you. Time is short because I can't just be like, you know, hey Silas, this is what's happening. I mean, maybe I could, but I feel like there needs to be a lot of like preemptive understanding, much of which you already have and stuff. But I could see a lot like your video you did, which really inspired me to actually contact you originally about the trees of Scotland. Was it where I'd have to watch
Oh
it again?
yes, yeah. Where the giants once slept. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, Treebeard, Treebeard. I gotta talk to this guy. Right, I like, I mean, that's what initially came to my mind. Now look, this is my personal view. This is what I've dug up after years of going through things. I don't believe every detail of it is absolutely accurate. I don't believe every conversation, every scene, every event is absolutely accurate. Do I think a decent portion of it is? Yes. Do I think that um the general events of what we're talking about the construction of like some kind of techne that allowed the control of people, and perhaps it was something else, but Tolkien called it a ring. Like, I don't know that there could be those kind of substitutions in place, right? I don't have a problem with that. But the general story of what is essentially happening through these processes, I think, is very much real. I've mentioned this to you before. The Silmarils are stones that are created by Feanor, the elf in Valerian, and what they do is that they trap essentially the light of the trees. That's what they did. He took the light from the trees and he trapped them in the three Silmarils, which is why Morgoth covets them. But he hates them, but he covets them, right? At the same time, there's that imperishable fire, and that's what the trees contain in them, is this imperishable fire. Feanor puts them into the Silmarils. He traps the light in these crystals. That's what they are, the three crystals. Well, just recently, and I posted this maybe a month ago to you guys. You guys even looked up the article, I think it was. Um, like DARPA and MIT and stuff, they've been able to create these photonic crystals that trap light.
Oh yes, yes.
They've been, they've been
I recall that.
essentially they've made a Silmaril. They're trying to replicate the Silmarils. Now they can't trap necessarily the flame imperishable, but they've been able to take light and get a crystal, and they get the crystal in there, and the light can't escape. Right. Well, that's exactly what Feanor did. Is the light didn't just flow through the script crystal. He had some way to get the light into these crystals, these Silmaril, and the light remained within those crystals. And Tolkien details that that light was actually sentient. It was like a plasma. It was a plasma light. It was like the flame imperishable that was essentially like sentient. It was like a derivative of the flame imperishable because it's light in Arda that was essentially sentient. And it was in these crystals that are now apparently lost, right? Or at least two are. One, maybe you look up in the sky and you can see it, but um, they were lost. And so, we can look. I mean, I've read that article. Dr. Farrell posted that article actually, and he was talking about it because he didn't want to say this, but 10 years ago, he thought that like, man, if they could trap light in a crystal, that would explain what was in the ark, of the covenant, and that was his disposition, what have you. But now I read that article and I'm like, they literally just created a Silmaril. They literally just created a crystal that traps light or that holds
Mhm.
light within it from escaping. That is the definition of a Silmaril. So like, it's very interesting that a lot of stuff that you read as a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old in a fantasy book, you can actually look at it and say, once you get down to the deep philosophy. You go through the Buddhism, you go through Heidegger, you go through Hegel, you go through Claudius, you get through all this deepest stuff, and you're looking at it, and I'm like, Claudius is saying the same thing essentially that Tolkien is saying, and you start looking at all this stuff, and then you're looking at biodigital, and you're looking at the occult and what they're doing and what they've been doing, and you're reading Tolkien, and I'm like I keep saying, everyone's talking about the same thing. You know, everyone's talking about the same stuff, and a lot of this fictionized stuff appears to be very real. Or was real at one time, was lost, and is now sort of being rediscovered on how to do it. So very, very interesting. But I don't know if this one should be a YouTube, just
Oh, no,
because
I mean,
man.
this is really quite fascinating, man. I think many people would take a lot from this. I mean,
The, the the
this.
Tolkien scholars would eviscerate me.
Oh, don't worry. No, I mean, Jesus Christ, you've blown my mind. My mind's blown. And from what I barely know about Tolkien's work, just looking into it and sort of the connections with, of course, Palantir and Yahweh and such. I mean, it's really pretty bang on. For example, here Frodo's vision in Galadriel's mirror. The Fellowship of the Ring, quote, "In the black abyss there appeared a single eye that slowly grew until it filled nearly all the mirror. The eye was rimmed with fire, but was itself glazed yellow as a cat's." Interesting, we're talking about the cat's eye nebula. "Watchful and
Hmm.
intent, and the black slit of its pupil opened on a pit, a window into nothing," unquote. And in Frodo's vision on Ammon Hen, quote, "And suddenly he felt the eye. There was an eye in the dark tower that did not sleep. One moment only it stared out, but as from some great window immeasurably high, there stabbed northward, a flame of red, the flicker of a piercing eye, and then the shadows were furled again, and the terrible vision was removed."
Hmm.
And then as in the Return of the King, as Frodo and Sam approach Mount Doom, quote, "Fire glowed amid the smoke, Mount Doom was burning, and a great reek rising." And it mentions here in Ezekiel 1:26-28, quote, "And above the expanse over their heads there was the likeness of a throne, an appearance like sapphire, color of in Sanskrit, literally sapphire. Its etymology is uh, Saturn's hue or Saturn's light, and seated above the likeness of a throne or of the throne was a likeness with a human appearance, and upward from what had the appearance of his waist I saw it, as it were, glowing metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around in it, and downward from what had the appearance of his waist I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, and there was brightness all around him like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, rainbow. So was the appearance of brightness all around." This is similar to Malak Tau and all of this, the flash of the
Yeah,
brilliance of
and
color.
and and, and remember, Malak Taus disperses its essence into the earth.
Oh, like Melkor as well.
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah,
Jesus.
yeah,
So
yeah,
this
yeah.
was the
See?
appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, and when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So right, so the Lord, right, okay, right. But here's the thing as well with Atlantis, right? We made that connection. Melik Taus is the Lord of this world, right? And
Right.
it's an archetype that goes by many names, thousands of names, probably hundreds of thousands of names, even into prehistory, if we assume this theory or hypothesis to be correct. Then in that sense, Atlantis or Numenor, they did worship Morgoth. They worshipped
They
Morgoth
did.
or Melkor, similar to them worshipping Poseidon, which is the Lord of the Earth, quite literally from the etymology of its name from Attic Greek, Lord of the
Yeah.
Earth.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I
Yep. Same
actually
thing.
there's
And
something else.
Poseidon. Yeah, Poseidon has his three-pointed trident, and
I was
that's the
about to
three
just
silver.
mention that.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
three
what is
Silmarils in his
three
crown.
Silmarils? Oh my
Yeah.
God, that's the three
Yeah.
Silmarils.
Yeah, because
Oh
Morgoth takes the
Jesus.
three Silmarils and puts them in his crown. Yeah. Those three points of light. Yeah.
and that relates to Shiva as well, with the Trishula. This creative destruction is also the auspicious one. Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
And see, these are things I've been seeing for like years, but it's like I can't tell anybody about this. Like no one's gonna believe me. Like, it's like
Well, see,
Frodo, wait, what? Like,
I know all of this, but see, tying this in with Tolkien,
right,
this just blows my mind.
right. That's what I'm saying. Once you get those tie-ins, and especially when you tie it in with Tolkien, because Tolkien's like, hey, this is the history of our Earth, right? And people are like, oh, like metaphorically, like he's like, yeah, sure, yeah, yeah, you know. And then we're digging up Hobbit bones, and we're finding dragon bones and all this other stuff, and elves, Tuatha Danann, and these elven races, these legends and stuff like that. And hey, look, at the beginning of the movie, and I gotta let you go right here, but at the beginning of the movie, and Galadriel, she doesn't actually say this in the books, but in the beginning of the movie, she says, um, "History becomes legend, legend becomes myth." She says, and for whatever, however many, for 2,000 years, all knowledge of the ring passed out of um out of knowledge. So she says, history, what is history? Oh, no, this happened, becomes a legend, and that legend just becomes like a myth. Yeah, it's just mythopoeic. It's just like a myth we tell ourselves to encourage ourselves or something like that. It just becomes myth, and then it's just utterly forgotten, right? It just gets buried by the sands of time. And what was once absolutely real and took place, over time and corruption, becomes um, becomes just a pure myth to people. And so it has no more reality to them, and they're disconnected from what is actually happening or what has actually happened, so they can't navigate. And hey, maybe like we talked about, that butterfly effect, that catastrophe, maybe old man Tolkien, with his master in languages, was digging around in the depths of Oxford Library, and there's that butterfly effect. Oh, here's a manuscript that escaped the clutches of the Roman Catholic Church. Let me read this. Let me read this. Oh, wait, well, I know that word. This translates to this. This translates to that. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Right? Maybe that's that little butterfly effect. Someone wrote that. You know, they wrote it down, and it would transfer hand to hand to hand to hand. That little people just doing little courageous acts and keeping the faith, so to speak, keeping the hope, and then it ended up in some stack in a library. And Roman Catholic Church just missed that one. They got the rest in their vaults. They know what's happening, but they missed this one. And some scholar got a hold of it, and to prevent him and his family from being killed, he said, "Oh, it's a fiction, and let me embellish this. And it's a fiction, but I'm going to slowly write all this. Hey, my son Christopher, publish this when I die." And Christopher published it, the Silmarillion.
Jesus. This
Yep.
explains why the followers of Melkor would destroy all the libraries as well. They would establish these Abrahamic faiths, which are sort of these puritanical, pharisaical, about I don't want to say abominations, but they
Yeah.
destroy all memory and all knowledge because again, Melkor or the spirit of Melkor, Yahweh, what have you, has to maintain ignorance so that he can
Right.
undo all of creation. Jesus. Well, man,
Yeah. And
we'll leave it there.
established himself as the Lord of the Earth. There's, you know, I am the I am. You know.
Yeah.
and,
Oh
and
my
still
God.
knowing that man has that kernel in him of that fear and dread of death. He knows that's there, and he can work that. So let me come up with a plan of salvation and blood sacrifice and atonement and jihad or whatever else we need to drive this forward, because we are going to uh reincarnate, and we're going to be the Lord of the Earth. you know
So
so
the self feeding furnace is basically to establish the Talos, the Iron Man. Jesus
yep.
Christ.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
man. Well, we'll leave it at
Hey,
that one.
good.
I'm gonna have some cracking dreams tonight. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, man.
I've spilled out my views to you. So uh
I think
there it is.
I
Yeah.
think you're on point. I actually think you're on point. I think you're on to something. I think you're on. I haven't. I feel inspired. I think you're on to something. Right, man.
Good. Well, that's what it's supposed to do. That's what it's supposed to do. You know, fourth of your lingus. You know.